Okay, so once again, welcome to today's program, which is the AES, the AES, and the struggle against imperialism in Africa, an assessment. Our speakers today, Comrade Nem Richardson from the Thomas Sankara Center in Burkina Faso, um, Comrade Benga Komolafe who is a trade unionist, leader of the General Secretary, the Federation of Informal Workers of Nigeria. I'm a member of Coalition for Revolution in Nigeria. And Comrade Ehi is also an organizer in Nigeria. Our moderator today will be Comrade Temitope Fagwa from the Pan-African Consciousness Renaissance. I need to raise my voice. So, we will get started. I will hand over to Comrade Fagwa from PACO to moderate today's program, and hopefully we will have more people joining us as we go along. Thank you very much for those who are here. Thank you. So, Comrade Fagwa, please.
Very well. We want to thank comrades for joining us. We also want to apologize for starting behind schedule. So just for comrades to know that we also have in our midst comrades that have decided to join us physically. So we are grateful for comrades that are with us physically. And we are also grateful for you for waiting for us till this moment, comrades. Comrades, the discussion for today is on the AES countries and the question of neocolonialism and the question of how we can build a better African continent. Comrades, it is not accidental that we have to come up with this theme. Why it is not accidental for us as to why we have to come up with this theme is because the question of how to defeat the forces of imperialism, the forces of neocolonialism pervades the African continent as at this time. Comrades, let us remind ourselves of the fact that about 3 years ago, we began to see, in existence what became the reason why we are here today. Comrades, let us take our mind back to the event that happened in Mali in 2021, where you had a major military coup against the backward neoliberal government of that country. Comrades, in 2022, a similar coup occurred in Burkina Faso. And yet, in 2023, another important coup happened in Niger. Comrades, in fact, for the fact that I had to call it coup, is also a show of the fact that as global African people, we are yet not dominating the narrative. Because when you look at the conventional media outlets, you would see that what these actions are being described are actions that tilt towards military coups. When in actual fact, to the masses of the Burkinabe people, to the masses of the Malian people, to the masses of the Nigerian people, these events are not close to, what you can call, or what the Western world will call military coups. To them, what they witness, fortunately for them, is an uprising. Many of them have described it as a revolution, the mass uprising of the poor people in these regions. And what are our people saying in these regions? What are our people saying in Burkina Faso? What are our people saying in Niger? What are our people saying in Mali? And it is not just a question of what our people are saying in these three places. It is also the question of what our people are beginning to say in Senegal, what our people are beginning to say in Chad, what our people are beginning to say across the Francophone West African countries. It is just one thing that they have done with French imperialism, that the time and the hour has come for French imperialism to be kicked out of their distinct countries. And we would see, comrades, that this demand seems, to be winning a greater number of our people in these territories, in these countries, to the question of solidarity, to this question of struggle, mass of African youth today in these countries are going to the, are going to the barricades, to fight all forces of imperialism and to lend their support to the government that had emerged from these uprisings. With respect to, for instance, the government of Ibrahim in Burkina Faso, the government of Mali and all of. The point is that these governments that are rising as a result of mass uprisings in these places, they are this particular point in time receiving mass support. So, comrades, this afternoon we want to ask ourselves: uh, we have been told by the bourgeois Western media that what is happening in these territories are things that needed to be condemned. Comrades, lest we forget that recently the United States of America declared these countries, to be non-personal grantor, that is, they are not going to issue, visa to citizens of this country, consequent to what had happened, in these countries. And we have been told again by the bourgeois, backward regional continental organizations that we have in Africa, that what is happening in these regions is nothing but a show of shame. That's what a particular AU chairperson, ex-AU chairperson said, that it is a show of shame. And we have also seen the reaction of the backward, bourgeois regional organization that we have here in West Africa in the name of ECOWAS, through, the backward activities, nefarious activities of the Nigerian government led by President Tinubu. We have seen, the actions that the Western world seems to be taking against this mass uprising. We are aware of all of these actions. We are also aware of the fact that that the French government, in an attempt to redeem the already damaged, that cannot be redeemed image, the already damaged, irremediable, image of the French government. They have also been trying to get elements within the West African, continent, region, to side with them. They have been in talks with the Nigerian government, in order to redeem their image across. But, comrades, the most important thing is that the mass of African people in these territories are saying to hell with all forces from all elements of imperialism, and they are lending their mass support, to the government of this country. And comrades, we have also seen that whilst the government of this country are not 100% clear on the question of the alternative, we have also seen that to some extent the government across these three countries have been coming up with some revolutionary solutions to the neo-colonial problems that faces us today, comrades. With the example of Ibrahim, recently we witnessed how Ibrahim, came up with a nationalistic policy, in the sense that the existing, some of the most important sectors in that country today have been nationalized by the Burkinabe, government. We think that this policy, in a way, is revolutionary in itself. Why we are not saying that everything is okay with this government? We are recognizing the fact that this government, the step at which they've taken is one that needs to be acknowledged by the mass of African people, is one that needs to be interrogated. Acknowledgement and interrogation, because we are indeed convinced that we are not there yet, despite the existence of this government. So, comrades, this gathering this afternoon is extremely important for us to engage the question of acknowledgement and the question of what needed to be done. We haven't arrived at our Eldorado. We don't think so. But in order to get to that Eldorado, events of this nature, cannot be glossed over. And that's why we must engage this discussion. So, comrades, to begin the conversation, we have indeed invited three speakers that we think are experts in this area, that we are convinced that they will be able to engage the discussion properly. Comrades, on behalf of our organization and the organization of the Movement of African Emancipation, we have been able to send invites, and luckily for us, we have them in attendance. We have firstly Comrade Benga Komolafe. We have secondly Comrade Ime Richardson, and we also have in our midst Comrade Eyi. These three comrades will engage the discussion, properly. From what we've had before this time, comrade, I think a suggestion has been made for 15 minutes. for our comrades to engage the discussion. We hope that within this minutes, comrades will be able to, interrogate the discussion and give us their own position clearly with respect to what is happening in these territories. So to begin the conversation, comrades, uh, permit me to invite Comrade Imesi Richardson. Comrade is going to lead the discussion. But before comrade begin his lead off, I would also like to recognize the presence of comrades that are in our midst here physically. We have Comrade Janet. She's here with us physically. She had decided to, solidarize with us for this event. We'd like to hear from her thereafter with respect to our own understanding of the subject matter. We also have our, fellow comrades from MAE, and we have comrades from the movement of the African movement, MOP, our movement of the people. They are in our midst. I won't be able to call comrades by their names. I hope that they would bear with me because of time. So, Comrade Ime Richardson, the floor is now over to you.
Okay, greetings. Thank you so much. I really appreciate, and I feel very honored to speak with you and to exchange about what I've had the immense privilege of experiencing and witnessing here in Burkina Faso over the past few years. As I think it was Comrade Shango who introduced me at the beginning, but as he stated, I am part of the Thomas Sankara Center here in Burkina Faso. I increasingly divide my time between Burkina Faso and Niger, but I've been to all three of the AES countries in the past year. So I've spent time in Mali, Burkina Faso, and in Niger, but much more time in Burkina Faso and Niger, and especially in Burkina, where I am right now. It's hard to know where to begin when describing the developments of the Alliance of Sahel States, because I feel so strongly that defending the revolutions that have unfolded in this region of Africa, just directly to your north, is really the basis, the cornerstone of the Pan-African struggle, of the revolutionary struggle, of the anti-imperialist struggle waged by African people worldwide in 2025. It really has to be our number one priority, because these three states are liberated zones. If we remember, Kwame Nkrumah wrote before his passing a book called Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, in which he divided the African continent into three zones. He spoke of zones under enemy control. Unfortunately, these are the majority of African states. These are neo-colonies, neocolonialism being the dominant form of economic domination and exploitation in Africa today. Unfortunately, I would argue this applies to Nigeria, but most of Nigeria's neighbors, with the exclusion of Niger. He talked of zones that are, he called them hotly contested zones. So in this context, these were places like, Guinea-Bissau, when the PIGC and Amilcar Cabral were fighting, against these colonial forces to actually build a liberated society. And then the third zone that Kwame Nkrumah described were liberated zones that had been emancipated from imperialism and neo-colonial rule. Now, understanding that it's always a process, you don't go from, several generations of exploitation and colonial plunder to a fully liberated, space overnight. It still is appropriate to understand that the Alliance of Sahel States, given these three definitions, is best defined as a liberated zone. And in terms of a liberated bloc on the African continent, it's probably our only liberated bloc. Of course, we have other states that have fought for their self-determination and sovereignty for many years, countries like Eritrea. But in terms of having an actual bloc unified, working towards this Pan-African objective, the Alliance of Sahel States is really what we have, as a people right now in this moment to defend. I really appreciate the opening remarks that were made about some of the progress that is unfolding in Burkina Faso in particular. I think Burkina Faso gets a lot of attention on the international stage. For one, I agree that the president here is charismatic. He's a great speaker. He is clearly, politically educating himself. I mean, there's many things that he says that is reminiscent of certain things that were said by figures like Malcolm X, the way he talks about media manipulation, the way he jokingly, I guess, but also in all seriousness, has referred to neo-colonial leaders as quote unquote house slaves or house Negroes. Is a very Malcolm X kind of formulation. But also some of the progress in terms of the nationalization of our gold mines here. The process of industrialization that's begun, it's small scale, but we understand that we're taking steps that are totally in the opposite direction of sort of what the previous neo-colonial administrations had allowed for. And so I think Burkina Faso gets a lot of attention, and for good reason, though I think it's also important, and I think particularly for people in Nigeria, to really forge strong connections with Niger, which is directly to your north. I've been to Niamey, Niger 3 times in the past 6 months. And I can say that when I'm in Niamey, the people that I encounter there feel very strongly connected to Nigerians, and there's a lot of going back and forth between Nigeria and Niger. But understandably, because Nigeria is a relatively massive country population-wise, and Niger is not so, I think they feel more of the influence from Nigeria than the other way around. But I think it's really important that Nigeria begins to develop those kinds of very, very strong links to the country directly to your north. I'd like to remind everybody that Niger is the very first African country in history to cut ties with US Africa Command, AFRICOM. There has been an international struggle waged by anti-imperialists, socialists, Pan-Africanists, revolutionaries, progressives over the past decade to call for the shutdown, the closure of US Africa Command, AFRICOM. When AFRICOM was created under George W. Bush, I mean, it's been, I don't know how many years, but I'm going to give a timeline of roughly a decade, give or take, of its existence. I think a little over a decade now. When it was created, there was initial pushback in Africa on the state level. But after the assassination of Muammar Gaddafi, pretty much every African state, with one sole exception, agreed to collaborate militarily with the United States. That one exception was Eritrea. Eritrea has never, since 1977 at least, has never had a military relationship with the United States. So the entirety of AFRICOM's existence has not collaborated. Every other country in Africa has worked with AFRICOM. Niger is the first country on this continent to have formally signed an agreement with AFRICOM, and then to go back and declare that AFRICOM's presence in their country is illegal. That's an incredibly bold move. As I just stated, this is something that Pan-Africanists, socialists, anti-imperialists have been calling for and fighting for about 10 or so years now. And so there's an important question in terms of what is our obligation to defend the very first African country that's actually heeded our calls, actually listened to our demands, and said, no, we reject all US military presence on our soil. We know that all 3 AES countries, beginning first with Mali, refused and ended French military collaboration. I mean, there's so many directions I can go in this, but I'm thinking about what's especially relevant, speaking to people who are in Nigeria. I think that there's so much to unpack in terms of what the AES is dealing with. That is just, it's a struggle that is part of the struggle in Nigeria in just such, to me, glaringly obvious ways. In the past month, there have been multiple scandals within the United States, especially tied to this rise in neo-fascism represented by Donald Trump. But one of the things that's been interesting coming out of the United States has been this move to defund and shut down programs from USAID. And in seeing the shutdown of certain USAID programs, there's been just this explosion, this proliferation of information tied to scandals that USAID has been directly involved in or has funded. One of the things that came up by congressmen in the United States during this hearing regarding USAID was the funding of terrorist organizations, including Boko Haram, which was explicitly named on the floor. I believe it was the Senate floor during this hearing. This is something that the AES countries have been saying for the past several years and tackling very directly. You know, when you hear about the Sahel in any sort of Western mainstream media coverage, you just hear about this sort of like barbarous warfare, this fighting. It's always framed in this sort of religious framework, and you don't really ever understand where these people came from, what they're doing, how this happened. We just know that, you know, the narrative for the past couple, you know, I guess it's been a couple decades now, yeah, since the Bush era, but really over the past 10 years in particular for Africa, has been that, you know, there needs to be this war on terror, and that the United States and France have to militarily occupy the Sahel and other parts of Africa, especially the Sahel though, and the Horn of Africa, in order to protect these countries from these random terrorist groups that have just, you know, formed overnight from who knows where. Well, Mali was the first country in 2022 to go before the UN General Assembly and to say, hey, these terrorist groups, these are French-backed groups. It's France that is funding and supporting. We have proof that France has armed these groups that they claim to be fighting against. I mean, that was an incredibly bold thing to declare at the level on the stage of the United Nations. I mean, this was a particular speech that was given by Abdoulaye Maiga, who's the current prime minister of Mali right now. This is a kind of truth that we don't hear coming out of the mouths of African leaders anymore. I mean, it's been a long time since we've heard this level of honesty in terms of declaring really who our enemies are in a real way. And since that time, we've heard this consistently from multiple leaders across the AES, that these so-called, you know, these terrorist groups, these death squads that we're fighting against, these are French-backed groups, these are Ukrainian-backed groups. I mean, Ukraine basically said publicly, two officials from Ukraine declared publicly that they're supporting the terrorist organizations. So the AES leaders didn't even have to say it. That was, you know, their own sort of announcement. And then, you know, increasingly now the United States coming under scrutiny, especially right now, for the same thing. And so I think that there's really a model to be examined in terms of how the Alliance of Sahel States is addressing its security crisis in ways that, you know, I think, just to speak honestly, but also with some humility, I think Nigeria can learn from in terms of, you know, having a parallel struggle along those lines. I mean, there's so much more I could say in terms of the quest for nationalizing resources. I mentioned the gold mines in Burkina Faso. I have to mention the uranium mines of Niger. Niger has some of the world's largest uranium deposits. Niger's uranium has been used for several decades now to provide electricity for France and the European Union. You know, it's the Eiffel Tower is a symbol of France, the symbol of Paris. And, you know, if you look at the Eiffel Tower at nighttime, you see, you know, it's lit up. There's all these lights that make it visible. But, you know, over the course of history, those lights have been powered by Niger's uranium deposits. So the actual symbol of France is powered by Niger. But Niger has along with Burkina Faso, some of the lowest rates of access to electricity on the planet. You know, according to the World Bank, and I don't like to quote the World Bank often, but I think that, you know, this particular statistic could be helpful. About 80% of Niger's population doesn't have access to electricity. And so the fact that Niger's government over the past year has expelled France's state-owned mining company, Orano, and said, we're taking control of our uranium deposits. You know, that's going to be under state control. That's a huge thing. You know, that's been the basis of Niger's economy. And, you know, there's an effort, as I've mentioned, to move past this this export of these crude minerals and, you know, raw materials towards processing and, you know, developing factories and, you know, developing and refining and transforming these resources in-house here in the Sahel. So, you know, Burkina Faso, for example, inaugurated, it's been maybe, this was like early 2024, late 2023, a mining waste refinery that's now officially, as of a couple months, producing its first gold bars. So we're seeing this transformation finally happening. I guess, I don't know how much time I have left. I want to speak as well to just the experience
Yes,
of,
comrade, you have just 3 minutes left. If you could
okay,
just
so
please manage.
I'll wrap up it. So I'll just say, I want to speak also to the fact that these three countries are largely rural countries that have agricultural based economies. And we're seeing massive transformations in the agricultural sector as well. I've seen so many videos of farmers just like cheering, some of them even crying with joy because they've had the most successful yields of their lifetimes because the government here is supplying them with basic farming equipment and necessities, as well as some advanced technologies, depending on certain areas. So, these farmers are receiving tractors, they're receiving seeds, they're receiving all sorts of technologies and equipments that's been transforming really their lives and their livelihoods. Ibrahim Traore here has made it very clear that, the goals of Burkina Faso and the AES in this moment are food sovereignty. This is based off of the Sankara model, where Sankara said, where is imperialism? Look at your plate. And he spoke of, we need to consume what we produce and produce what we consume. Industrialization, as I've repeated many times. And then there's this quest towards Pan-Africanism. So we have a confederation of states right now, these three countries that have their own separate governments, but they've been very clear in their objective of moving towards a Pan-African federation, which is really what the people, especially on the grassroots level, are fighting for. They're doing everything in their power to organize, to create a single Pan-African state that will eliminate the colonial borders, and allow for people to have a shared citizenship, a centralized government, some form of centralized planning across these three states. It's a process. There's incredible changes that have happened, and there's things that need to happen still. But it's been Burkina Faso's most rapid period of development since the assassination of Sankara in 1987. And, there's so much more I could say. I would love to talk more about Niger as well, but I think I'll stop here. Just for the sake of time, and I'd be happy to answer questions as well if people have specific things they want to learn more about.
We want to thank you, comrade, for this explicit delivery. And I can say to you that indeed, I'm certain that some of our comrades would want to ask questions, day after. So would, kindly want you to still wait back, for the questions, for the feedback, from the floor. Comrades, we've listened to Comrade Richardson, Comrade Domestic, and she had given us interesting, background to the discourse. Comrade, in fact, and I think it is very, very important that she has said that there's a necessity for those of us living in Nigeria, to see the best possible way at which we can, create that solidarity with our brothers and sisters in Nigeria. And I think this is very, very important, despite the antics of the ruling class in these two places to set the people apart. A certain part of Niger is not far away from a particular state in northern part of Nigeria, and it will amaze you, comrades, that these two communities, they speak same language. In fact, they have cousins, they have family members, relatives amongst themselves. But for the past how many years now, consequent to this, this backward road that the Nigerian state has been playing, there seems to be a growing, ethnic tension among these persons staying in this same community. So you can begin to imagine how much, the Nigerian ruling class, the backward ruling class we have in Africa would go, in order to set the people apart. So comrade, we thank you for that interesting lead up, and I think it is also important to mention that the book, the Kwame Nkrumah book that you mentioned in the course of your presentation, that is the handbook of revolutionary warfare by Kwame, is very, very important, particularly at this time. Kwame Nkrumah had said, long time ago, that whether we like it or not, if the neo-colonial questions are not being solved in Africa, the mass of the African continent, the mass of African people would go into what we call a cannibalistic relationship, ethnic tension, the dominance of agents of the international finance capital. All of these realities confront us today, comrades. So that is why I think the leader by our comrade is very, very important. Comrades, you permit me to bring to the podium to give to the mic our comrade Benga Komolafe, to join in the conversation. Comrade, over to you.
Oh. Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, comrade moderator. I hope you are all hearing me.
Yes, we can hear you.
The network has been very tricky here. Great. I want to commend the MAE, especially at this time, and it's also very commendable that they have decided to pick on a very contentious point of interest, the emergence of the AES and its prospects for renewing the Pan-African agenda. Pan-Africanism was envisioned as a movement towards building a single African nation on the basis of shared history and common cultural values. It's also a movement geared towards achieving socio-economic independence and an autonomous development that will engender that colonial vestiges of massive inequalities and extreme dependency on the Western imperialist centers, and it's dealt with. We have a severance. We achieve a severance, and we're able to build an autonomous social and economic system that will work for the majority of African people. Unfortunately, this has been very difficult to achieve because the structure that sustained slave trade for 300 years and that also made colonialism possible for another century are still very much intact. Those structures were built on the basis of division of African people. People were deliberately set against each other to facilitate the intertribal wars that engendered the slave trade. And under colonialism, people were also African people were set against each other to facilitate colonial plunder. And in the present era of neo-colonial domination, imperialism has thrived on the basis of this division. So achieving Pan-African unity is therefore a very arduous task. It will mean overcoming the legacy of this deliberate and intentional division of African peoples along ethnic, religious, and sometimes even social and cultural identities. It's within that context that some of us find exciting the emergence of the AES as perhaps the boldest attempt to reconstruct the Pan-Africanist vision in contemporary times. I listen intently to Imem because she lives in Burkina Faso, and I know she has a lot of first-hand experience of what's actually going on. And it's really, just trying to check on what's been going on in the past few years since the emergence of these three regimes in Mali, 2021, Burkina Faso, the emergence of Traore after he sent out Damiba in 2023, I think, yeah. And then, of course, the latest, Niger. Niger is of special interest, and I'm happy she dwelt a little bit more on Niger because it shares borders with Nigeria. Actually, a lot of Nigerians and a lot of Nigerians actually share a lot of cultural identities, religion, language, and ethnicity. And it has also informed the kind of response we have had in Nigeria to the events unfolding in Niger Republic. In my attempt to look at some of the background to the emergence of the Nigerian military junta, I came across a very interesting report by Financial Times, which is a prominent, well-known, respected, in quotes, Western media. And it reports an interview of Bazoum. And I think it's important to dwell a little bit on that interview. In that interview, Bazoum gave a lot of apologies for French neocolonial policy in Africa. Bazoum said, and I want to quote, France has a lot of adversaries, and they want to project an image of France as a neocolonialist power. Some stick to that cliché, which is not true, but which is very useful for propaganda. That's Bazoum. He also goes on and on about how anti-French propagandists has belittled French contribution to fight terrorism in Niger. He made reference to Burkina Faso, where, according to him, things have gotten a lot worse over the past year that the French had been sent packing. This was Financial Times, May 20, 2023. If you read the entire article, honestly, I would say that is enough for any politically conscious person to arrive at the conclusion that this kind of element really needs to be kicked out. These are the types that have actually ensured Africa perpetual underdevelopment since over 60 years of so-called political independence. So for me, Bazoum is good riddance to a lot of bad rubbish. And what I find exciting, despite the limitation of the, because we also have no illusions about the military junta that took over from Bazoum. These are guys from the presidential guard who are particularly close to providing protection for the presidents of Niger. And these are people who also had their own personal grudges and so on and so forth. But despite that, I'm particularly enthused by the massive movement that have emerged since the emergence of this military regime. And the massive effusion of support, not so much for the soldiers, but for the initiatives that they have put forward in terms of taking ownership of the natural resources of Niger. Since they came, they've tried to redefine the logic of extraction of uranium and other critical minerals that the French has literally been playing Ludo with for decades. Like Imam said, I mean, Niger at least provide over 25 to 30% of electricity in France, as well as a large part of Europe. And but 80% of Nigerians have no access to electricity, over 80%. In fact, large swaths of Niger Republic have no inkling of what grid electricity actually look like. So since then, of course, we have also seen massive investment in solar energy, very deliberate and serious effort to make sure that there's increased electricity supply, despite the problem. And you will remember, Niger, since they came barely 2 years ago, has been subject of a sanction, a very crippling sanction. I have an inkling of the depth of the effect of those sanctions by virtue of some of my members, the members of my organization in Katsina State, who actually, reported that those sanctions also affected, to a very serious extent, the people sharing, the people around Kano, Katsina, up to Borno, that share borders directly with Niger Republic, and have had to depend historically on food supplies from Niger. That sanction, which also meant cutting off electricity supply to Niamey by the Tinubu government, like Ibrahim Traore, tried to explain it, was nothing short of genocide, because it meant people died in hospitals because there was no electricity, and electricity supply from Nigeria was not an act of charity. It was actually part of the agreement that if Nigeria was going to build the Kanji Dam, it was going to also supply some of the electricity to Niger. Otherwise, Niger could as well also build its own dam across the Niger and staff Kanji Dam of water. So it's not as if Nigeria is doing any, charity by providing, but they breached all of those extant agreements and subjected the Nigerian people to that horrible experience, So cross-border trade was badly affected, impacting not only the Nigerians, but also Nigerians, especially in the informal sector, people actually, and of course we know that over 90% of our people actually depend on informal production and trade. So you can imagine the impact on the poor working people of both countries. So Niger has also had to deal with expelling first French military interest, then later on American. And like Ian said, that was significant because Niger was host to the largest drone base of the American military. In fact, since that facility was built, it has been a major source, of terrorist infiltration into Niger and terrorist attacks that has, of course, accounted for huge insecurity problems and so on and so forth. So it's no mean achievement that these actions were taken by a regime under sanctions, under serious international pressures, under extreme pressure by ECOWAS and neighboring countries. Some of these things they are taking on actually should be appreciated within that context. And of course, they have had to renegotiate contracts with multinational companies. They've had to terminate some contracts outrightly. And of course, we know that today Niger earns more from uranium, and some of those contracts still under negotiation, and so on and so forth. And these are the kind of things we want to hear in terms of actually building a national economy that is not dependent on a colonial power, that is an economic system that is built on structures of independence, of mutually beneficial relationships with other countries that have the technical know-how to help exploit economic opportunities. So they've struck agreement with Turkey, with the Russians, and several other countries that have better terms, to offer. So Niger may not actually report the kind of very exciting news we get to hear in terms of concrete brick and mortar development in Burkina Faso. But some of the things that has happened in Niger, despite the terrible situation they have found themselves in the past 2 years, especially the blockades, the sanctions, the campaigns, and all of that, are really very remarkable. And of course, talking about Burkina Faso, like Inem said, we have an Ibrahim Traore that has become simply an inspiration for African youth, whether we like it or not. It seemed to talk straight from the heart, and people can feel that. People can connect with that. It talks to the historic oppression of his people and the debt poor status that people in that part of Africa has been reduced to. It talks to the fact that yes, we are in the Sahel, we are in the desert, but it doesn't mean that food don't grow here. And he has practically proved that yes, food do grow in the desert, can grow in the desert. Like him said, there has been 50% recorded, output, agricultural output in Burkina Faso. And I should also mention that about Niger, that despite the problems, food output has also markedly increased in Niger Republic. As a matter of fact, the food farming we have in Nigeria is getting a little bit reduced now because there is now increased food import from Niger, especially since the sanctions have been lifted. And some of my people in Katsina tell me, that part of the reasons why you have increased food production in Niger is because there's also reduced security threats in Niger. In fact, according to them, the Lakurawa terrorists that are now ravaging, large swaths of northwest Nigeria, most of them actually terrorists pushed out of Niger Republic. Of course, there have been massive infrastructural development across these three countries, especially Burkina Faso and Mali. We have new metro lines, new railway. What excites me about the railway development in Burkina Faso is that they're also investing in wagon production. So it's not just about importing everything. They are actually investing in the capacity to own the production of the wagons so that the train wagons and other critical inputs will be locally produced and producing jobs. Yes.
Hello, comrade.
And technical knowledge. Yeah.
Yes, comrade, you have, well, your time is fast spent already, but we could just give you a minute to round up.
Okay. I will just round up by saying that, yeah, the old dream of Pan-Africanism seems to be getting reignited by what we are seeing in the Sahelian state of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger Republic. The problem some people have with this territory is that this process is being led by soldiers. And I've had to make the point severally that I don't care whether you are a soldier or you are so-called civilian in government. What I care about is actually what you represent, what you do, and how your programs and orientation actually resonate with the heartbeat of the people and the basic need, existential need of the people. So for me, they are raising a lot of hope, they are raising a lot of enthusiasm and excitement. The challenge, in my own view, is for us to continue to lend very critical support to these regimes. And we are not saying we should just applaud everything. We have to continue to keep them on their toes, and we have to learn the critical lessons. And more importantly, we have to see how we connect with our people in those countries so that our people here can also be part of the massive fusion.
Thank you very much, comrade.
African
Thank you very much, comrade.
That these people are generating. Thank you.
Comrades, we want to thank Comrade GK for the delivery, for the lead off. Comrade has reminded us of the necessity to connect what is happening in recent times on the continent and also in these regions, to the Atlantic slavery and also to the backward experience we had of colonialism. Comrade GK has reminded us of the fact that there is nowhere at which we will discuss, neo-colonial Africa, the existence of all of these imperialist forces without not making references to how the existence of these institutions, colonial structures that are still being maintained, that are still being sustained in these societies, have kept us down. Comrade has also, given us, an understanding of what it seems to be happening economically in these territories. Comrade GK has reminded us of quite a number of investments that governments in this coalition, in this alliance, seems to have been implementing since their emergence. Ultimately, Comrade GK, had said that everything boils down to power. It's about power. It's a question of power. Comrade has reminded us of the fact that power can be likened, or power is akin to water. You can use water to bathe, you can use water to cook, you can use water to wash, whatever. Comrade has reminded us of that fact that indeed political power is just, akin to water. You can use it very well and you can use it badly. Just that the reality that confronts us on the African continent is that the so-called backward elite that we have been using this, power against the will of the generality of the African people. So we want to thank Comrade GK for that important reminder and delivery. Right about now, Comrade, we feel that we should open up the room for questions and reactions before going into the last lead off, that is to be delivered by Comrade A. We think that, having listened to Comrade Men and also Comrade GK, I think it will be ripe for us to have an interactive section. So we are this time opening the room for comrades. You could signify just by a show of hand if you have a reaction and a question, or questions or reactions to pose to our speakers. You can do that online by show of hand. And we are also opening the floor to our comrades that are here physically with us, that to join in the conversation, this is the moment at which you could identify yourself so that we would call on you for your questions and for your reaction. But before we do so, comrades, permit me to recognize in our midst physically here some of our comrades from important organizations that some of us feel that there's a necessity to work with, and as such we have been interested in the progress of these organizations. Permit me, comrades, to introduce to the house our comrade Lagos coordinator of the Movement of the People, Comrade Lekon from the MOP. We should introduce you very well. Thank you for joining us, comrade. We also have in our midst another important member of Lagos MOP, in the person of Comrade Erico. Comrade Erico. We also have in our midst an important member of the MAE, also a co-comrade of the MOP, in the person of Comrade Jide, a very good comrade of ours. Comrades, also permit me to introduce to you an important comrade of ours from the Movement of African Emancipation, in the person of Comrade Yinka Adeyinka, please, comrade. And we also have in our midst Comrade Dynamism. Comrade Dynamism. And we have also Comrade Olajide from MOP. Comrade, please. We are secretary, and it's also Lagos State Secretary of MOP. Good to have you here, comrade. We also have in our midst a comrade that appears to be hiding his face through with his cap. Komodoye from the Egypt band. He has decided to join us this evening. Comrades, thank you for your participation. We are so much appreciative of your presence. Comrade, maybe I should go first if I'm being given the opportunity. I would like to pose my question, and I think these two questions are relatable with what two comrades have said. And I would hope that also, comrade, please, we are not getting the show of hands from the group, from the Zoom room. Please, by a show of hand, we would like to get your questions and also your reactions. I want Comrade GK and also Comrade Imin to react to this. Comrades, there is no way out which the struggle against imperialism, the struggle against neocolonialism will not be met with the stiff resistance of agents of the global north. There is no way out which what is happening in Burkina Faso, what is happening in all of these territories will not be met, with the resistance of the imperialist nation. Comrades, some of our persons have been hiding under a very terrible illusion with this whole foreign policy that Trump seems to be, rolling to the faces of members of the international community. Many persons have been saying that with the way things are going, Trump's foreign policy appears to be non-interventionist in nature. That is, countries can go ahead and do whatever they can, But comrades, we know that this is not true. As far as the international agents of the international finance capital are in existence, as far as the multinational corporations that are owned by these imperialist nations are still in existence, we think that we really do not need a Trump to come down to Africa before telling us that indeed the imperialist forces are still very much alarmed. And we have seen, comrades, that with their policies, there is a likelihood of more Western nations coming up with economic sanctions. There's a tendency that these countries in the coming period we have to face the crisis of economic, sanctions. And we have seen, comrades, since the end of the Cold War, since the 1990s, one of the most important, potent, weapon that the imperialist nations have been using all along, to emasculate, important people's struggles, such as this, is the question of economic sanctions. They will come up with these policies, through the complicit interventions of, the international organizations, World Trade Organizations and what have you. They would, emasculate whatever is happening in these countries. They've been doing this since the 90s, and in fact, before the 90s. Also, comrades, with this reality in existence, with Trump's administration in existence, and also, the continuous activities of all of these multinational corporations, do we genuinely think that what is happening in these countries can survive, the resistance of the imperialist nations, internationally and locally? We are aware of the fact that whenever the, imperialist nation, finds it difficult to intrude into your economy, what they will do is to raise, some elements even within, the country against the government. They will do this through the media. They will do this through the activities of the NGO. So, comrades, the question really is then to say that under a very terrible imperialist, Trump's administration, do we think that these countries can survive the antics of imperialism moving forward? I think Comrade Ime could go first.
Okay, it's an important question, and I think it should be, I mean, it's 2025. I think, anybody who is listening to this has to be somebody who has at least some level of interest in politics and history and trying to understand the condition and the place that we find ourselves in as Africans. So I trust that we all understand that, anytime African people are going to rise up and resist imperialism, capitalism, neocolonialism, this state that we find ourselves in, there's always going to be imperialist pushback. The enemy is always going to do everything in its power to suppress us. And, quite frankly, if the West right now wasn't trying to come and do everything they could in their power to destabilize the Sahel or to, push back against the resistance that's happening, I would actually be concerned. I think the fact that the imperialists are interested in this AES revolution and are, doing everything in their power to combat it, already, to me, I think signals a certain direction that we're headed in. So, if it wasn't happening, I would be more worried in a way. But with that being said, of course, we have to make sure it's our responsibility collectively as Africans, and of course, as anti-imperialists, as people who are, progressive-minded people who have, maybe revolutionary ambitions, whatnot, to defend Africa's only liberated bloc right now. I think one of the ways that the Sahel is being targeted very hard already is through this sort of media campaign that is depicting the Sahel as this place of just chaotic violence like coming from all sides. And it's so hard to sort out. I think if you just read the media reports, Voice of America is very loud. France 24 is very loud. Unfortunately, even Al Jazeera, and it can't be that surprising. Al Jazeera also doesn't have the most progressive line when it comes to Latin America's revolutions either. They're depicting the military forces in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger in a certain way. This is a part of an imperialist strategy that's been around for so long of manufacturing consent. It's really hard to target countries that have either revolutionary politics or anti-imperialist politics when the population of those countries stands so firmly in favor of the leadership, when the people are so united, and when, on the world stage, there's so much support for these countries, for these struggles, for these really processes of, I guess, modern national liberation. You can't really defeat a that is admired and defended to that extent. You really have to start first of all, with a strategy of division and balkanization. One of the things that gives me a lot of hope in Burkina Faso and the Sahel right now is that what I see around me, and I've been all around the country, I've been all around Burkina Faso, I see a population of people that really are united, across ethnic lines, across religious lines. They overwhelmingly do support the leadership, and they mobilize, they organize. There's a network here called the Citizens Night Watch in the local language. It's called the Waiya, and it's a mass organization that spans the entirety of Burkina Faso, existing, I was told by one of the representatives, existing across 2,000 cities and villages in the country. And they come out every night from maybe 9 p.m. to maybe 4 or 5 a.m. to serve as the eyes and ears of the revolution. So in Ouagadougou, in the capital, they come to every single roundabout in the city. So they're in every single neighborhood. And in the other big cities, like the second biggest city is called Bobo Dioulasso, they do the same thing. And then, every village might have like one section of this. And this is a completely, grassroots organized initiative to defend and protect what's going on here. So there's massive support. And I honestly, we hear all the time about media lies and, media propaganda. It's, for decades, we've heard about how the media manipulates people. Again, this is something that Malcolm X spoke about so much. He said, if you don't pay attention, the journals will have you love the people who are doing the oppressing and hate the people who are oppressed. It's a kind of his quote, I'm paraphrasing, but more or less that's what he said. And he talked about how the media is the most powerful entity in the world. And that was in the 60s. And so now we're in 2025. So I really hope we've learned our lesson. We are living in a world that's post the Iraq War at this point. We've seen, publicly on a world stage how, media lies and a fabricated campaign can cause the deaths of, somewhere between 500,000 to 1 million innocent people. We've seen this, play out. So I think we should be in a stage now where we're hypercritical of, the information that comes out on the Sahel. And we should actually see it, like I said, almost in a way from our lens, being where we're at as politically educated people, almost as a positive indicator that these sort of imperialist outlets are coming so hard for the Sahel. If France 24, if Radio France International, if Voice of America are smearing constantly the Alliance of Sahel states left and right, that should actually indicate to us that they're doing something positive. Because what other countries are they attacking all the time in the media? If it's not, countries that are resisting imperialism, Cuba doesn't get good press coverage in the media. It never, not in the Western media, it never has. Venezuela doesn't get good coverage in Western media. I think if one day we began to see the opposite and praising these countries, I would be very concerned. So I think that we really have to take things from that perspective. So that's one of the things I see really targeting the Sahel. And I think it's so shocking because it's like you always hear about how the media lies, but I don't think I ever realized the full extent until I was here. Sometimes I try not to talk about some of the media claims that come out because I don't like to spread this sort of like the propaganda machine. Like I don't like to help them do their job and spread the information further. But I think it is worth saying certain things because people are seeing it and they are engaging with it. There are certain things that are just astonishing for me. Like I live in Ouagadougou. I've been, like I said, I've been around Burkina Faso. I've been living here for years. I talk to people, all across, I talk to farmers, I talk to people who work in the markets, I talk to students, I talk to so many people. And it's just shocking when I see there's one of the things I see that I think is just so, I don't know, it baffles me. There's this narrative in a lot of media reports of there being some sort of like ethnic cleansing in Burkina Faso. There's some sort of genocide happening. And it just doesn't exist. Like I said, like I just know people across ethnic lines who support what's going on, but there's this narrative that's being pushed. I see it in these reports that's like, there's the targeted killings of specific ethnic groups, and the comrades. I have comrades who are from these communities, and I've never heard anything, not one word. I've not seen any mobilization saying that any particular groups are being targeted. Nothing. I mean, it's like non-existent when you're actually here on the ground. And there's all these things. There's been Human Rights Watch has now published another, yet they did this last year, they did it now again recently in 2025, another report claiming that there's these massacres of civilians happening by the military forces here in Burkina Faso. And again, it's astounding because there's nothing on the ground to indicate that there's any sort of violence meted out towards civilians. If it's not that I go online and I see this reported in these like Voice of America type of publications, or maybe BBC. If it's not that I'm looking at BBC, I don't hear anything about this on the ground here. I mean, there's not one like protest that's happened locally. There's not one mobilization that's saying, stop the killings. There's no one, there's nothing that's actually on the ground here claiming that this is real. It's only people, the only people who seem to be doing this are people who have these connections to Voice of America elsewhere, or like BBC. Otherwise, like I'm like, where are these voices coming from?
Comrade, okay. Thank you.
Can I say just one last thing, and just on that note,
go ahead, comrade.
Just to conclude, the only mobilizations that I've seen in terms of like people addressing these claims have been actually people coming out and organizing protests against these media reports targeting the country, against Human Rights Watch. There's been protests in front of the U.S. Embassy saying that, we know that the U.S. Embassy is responsible for what Human Rights Watch is putting out. And then the protesters said, we burned down the French embassy, and they did. And they said, we will burn down the U.S. Embassy if you continue to smear our country. So the only sort of mobilizations are actually mobilizations against these this sort of media narrative that's coming from the outside, exclusively from the outside. I'll stop here.
Comrade, I find that very, very interesting. I mean, that is a very, very revolutionary stance being taken by people over there. Many of us, we know how much propaganda, as alone, weakened revolutionary government, as alone, destroy revolutionary, stances against imperialism and neocolonialism. So we are very, very much, appreciative of the fact that our people are taking their stand against U.S. imperialism, U.S. propaganda in Burkina Faso. And I want to use this moment to also say to you that more power to you. For some of us, we have also, been seeing your works personally, because it is important. For us as revolutionaries, we must also use that propaganda, which that information, that that power that the imperialist forces have over information. We must also capitalize that on that. And for some of us, we have been seeing your works also personally, and so we say more power to you, more knowledge to you. with respect to that. Comrade GK, I would like to bring you in now. Our comrade sister, she has given us interesting, you know, understanding as to how our people are taking their stand against propaganda in that country. I would want to size your opinion, comrade, over this whole debate, the debate around, which is very, very important. It's also relevant in our understanding of the antics of Western propaganda. The debate around political institutions and economic institutions. Comrades are aware of the fact that since the collapse of the defunct Soviet Union, what has happened is that the world internationally has entered a stage of unipolarity, politically, economically. Since the 1990s, the entirety of what is happening in the global south is consistently being dictated by the global north. So much so that some of us, we understand Western democracy to be a political tool of neoliberalism, for whatever, because an economic philosophy would have, a political system that it relies upon. And so Western democracy today, to us, more than any other time, appears to be a political tool of neoliberalism. And we have seen the results, the consequences of the existence of these two institutions on the African continent since the 1990s. The existence of these institutions have led us into the turmoil that we are facing today in Nigeria. Politically, we have in Nigeria a backward political institution that allows the existence, that gives ground, that gives the leeway for the existence of criminal, to hold, political powers. Not just criminals, sexiest individuals. You can imagine a character such as the Senate president of this country, having no respect whatsoever to the person of a woman. These are the kind of non-entities that are governing us, comrades, in the political space. And it's not just a question of what is happening within Nigeria. It's also the question of what is happening in Kenya, where is happening. We have backward elements, dictating the affairs of our communities, and what has led to the emergence of these elements, because as for whatever problem you might have, with traditional political institutions, African politics, I mean, it will be so, so pedestrian and so backward of any of these institutions to rear any of these guys that we are seeing today. That is the reality, comrades. As backward as proto-Fudwa Africa was, I mean, we still had leaders, majority of leaders that we had during this period, at least had one thing, which is the question of loyalty. They were loyal to their, proto, nascent kingdoms and empires and whatnot. But this element today have no loyalty whatsoever to the motherland, have no loyalty whatsoever to the fatherland, comrades. So politically, economically, we have in existence this element. And what has led to the emergence of this element is this same backward Western, political institutions, Western democracy. Consistently, we have elections on the African continent. Right now, we have been told that the most expensive election to have ever held on the African continent recently, I think, was held in Egypt. Nigeria in 2015, used to enjoy that title. Most expensive election ever to be held on the African continent was held in 2015 in Africa, in Nigeria. But I mean, the consequence of that election, has been nothing but mass poverty for the people, mass hunger, rate of unemployment had risen beyond what it used to be. Rate of inflation had gone up so much so that mass of people, our youth, are tired of these socioeconomic realities. What is responsible for the existence of this reality again, comrade, is the Western institution. So, comrade GK, with respect to the existence of these institutions, these backward, political institutions and economic, what fear do you think we should be nursing any fear with respect to the ideological debate going on around the existence of Western democracy and the necessity of an alternative? I'm saying this because despite the clarity of some of our comrades are saying that what is happening in these countries what is happening in these countries are undemocratic, that the fact that they came in, quote and unquote, through military coups, that in fact makes them to be condemnable. So Comrade GK, do you think that we should, at this material point in time, be thinking of an alternative, or we should be thinking of how we will reform our existence within Western neoliberal political system and economic system? Over to you, Comrade GK.
Yeah, lots of issues you have raised, comrade. Yeah, but I'll try and extract some basic elements of some of the serious issues you have raised. The first one that you actually raised, which Inem spoke to, is can our people resist imperialism, especially in the age of neo-fascist Trump? I want to say yes, a confident yes. And my ready reference is Niger. Niger actually came under intense pressure from imperialism, using ECOWAS as a front. The sanctions were no joke, comrades. Then the quest to actually militarily attack Niger was also no joke. President Tinubu actually meant, as well as other elements like the Côte d'Ivoire character, and some of them that are ultra, that are particularly very backward, were actually intent on making sure. And even the Ghanaian president, the one that lost, the one that just had his party voted out of power in Ghana. Can't remember his name now. These guys were very intense and actually militarily, having ECOWAS attack Niger to reverse what was going on there. But they couldn't go forward. They couldn't achieve anything with that quest, because not only Nigerian people, but also people across West Africa stood up to say, no, you can't attack Niger. Particularly in Nigeria, in northern Nigeria, people came out vehemently to say that if you attack Niger, you are attacking us. And President Tinubu got the message. He knew that if he had gone ahead, that would have been the end of the regime. So that shows that when people are united and are mobilized, they have the capacity to defend their own revolutionary movement. Then the other issue you are raising about, why do we have this plethora of bootlickers, people just don't give a damn for, they don't know about their own people. They are ready to, I want to say that it's really nothing new, actually. In the era of slave trade, Africans actually wage war against Africans to capture slaves for the slave merchants in the coast. This trans-Saharan slave trade also thrived on the fact that some people collaborated with the Arabs to sell their people into slavery. So it's always been there. In the colonial period, there were people who actively collaborated with the colonialists against their own people. And of course, in contemporary times, we're having the same trend of local collaborators and traitors who are ready to sell their own people for a mess of pottage. So it's nothing new. But what is perhaps worrisome is the fact that because of the preponderance of what I would call imperialist culture, the preponderance of Western imperialist culture, which is perpetuated through the media, which is a powerful means of socialization. We now have a situation where the dominant wisdom actually is, to be subservient to Western imperial interests. So you have leaders, and not just isolated individuals now. On a mass scale, you have Africans, you have people who actually think the only way they can achieve development, that we can achieve development in this part of the world, is to seek inspiration from the West, that nothing can be done except through the West. So democracy is defined only through the prism of the West. There must be periodic election or these useless elections. It doesn't matter whether at the end of the day, the elections are only a field of play for the super rich people who actually have been able to feed fat on our common patrimony, who have actually stolen in massive quantities our common wealth, and who use this wealth to rig election and perpetuate themselves in power. People believe that there's no alternative to that fate, because they think that the only way you can have governance is through periodic elections. So says the West, and so it must be. And it's unfortunate that even among people you think has higher political consciousness, even among our comrades, you see people re-echoing this kind of sentiment. This is democracy. There's a new term I find very funny. They call it democracy backsliding. The silent states are bad. I say, where is the democracy to start with? Who in his right mind would define what's happening in Nigeria right now as democracy? We had 97 million potentially, voters in Nigeria. Only 8 million voted for the present president. 8 million out of 97. How is that a rule of majority? How does it? It doesn't, for me, it doesn't rhyme. It doesn't work out. The arithmetic doesn't make sense. The logic doesn't make sense to me. It's really about people, government of the people, by the people, majority must have their way, blah, blah, blah. I don't see majority having any way here. I only see a tiny minority manipulating a given system to perpetuate themselves in power and replicating themselves at least for 25 years now in Nigeria. And there doesn't seem to be any end to it. So it is time we begin to question some of these orthodoxies and to really begin to look at the essentials. Democracy without a social content, beyond voting periodically, beyond having, so-called free media, which in actual reality are actually outposts of the dominant elite interest. Most of the media houses are owned by the same people, by the same politicians. And yes, and that's what we call free media. How can that be free when we know that these are organizations specifically set out to project political ambitions? And you call that free media. So we must begin to question some of these things. And then more importantly, we must begin to look at the social and economic content. And that's my concern, really. Like somebody says, the economic, stupid. I mean, whether you call yourself popularly elected in quote, like Bazoum was popularly elected and he was defending French imperialism, or you find yourself in power through a coup, well, do whatever means. What do you represent? What is your program? How are you mobilizing people around your program? How do you want to redefine the paradigm of development from dependency to re-nationalist independence and autocentric economic and social development? How are you addressing the cultural question? And so on. So that for me, yeah.
Komichike, could you just quickly add this to one of the things that I think you should speak on? And I mean, if you could just do this within 2 minutes, because we have 2 hands already up there, and would also want to get the intervention. Now, do you see African states, the neo-colonial African countries, ECOWAS, Nigeria, and all of these guys, do you see them as a threat to what is happening in AES? And quickly, within just 2 minutes, so that we go ahead with others.
Sorry, I didn't get that question.
Do you see the antics of the activities of the neighboring countries, the Anglophone countries, Nigeria, Ghana, against Burkina Faso? Do you see this threat as a worldwide threat that we should be concerned over? Do you think they are capable of emasculating what is happening in these countries?
Yeah, the pose serious potent threat if we don't address it. And I spoke to that earlier. The fact that people actually rose up in northern Nigeria to say that President Tinubu cannot attack Niger went a long way to stop ECOWAS from going ahead, because they were going to go ahead. And of course, France and the US were solidly behind them to actually use the instrumentality of ECOWAS to attack and roll back what was happening in Niger. Yeah, so they pose very potent threats. But the good thing is that the idiot we had in Ghana is out now. We have a Mahama who seems to be much more alert to his historic responsibility as an African leader. He's connecting very well with the AES and has expressed support, especially with Burkina Faso, with which Ghana, share these northern borders. But we still have them. The character in Cote d'Ivoire is still there. That's one French lackey that will go to any length, to promote French imperial interest. But the truth is that there was a survey in the Economist newspaper, sometimes in 2022. It's very interesting. They surveyed the opinion of African youth about the juntas in the AES, and 78%, overwhelming 78%, expressed support for the AES and the various military governments. And we've had massive, very massive, quite unprecedented in recent times, demonstrations in support of this government. At the end of the day, that's what was going to define the durability of this government. And that's why hopefully, this threat will also keep these governments on their toes. They know they don't have a lot of friends, in the powerful quarters. So it will keep them on their toes to continue to perform, to continue to dismantle, neo-colonial barriers to development, and ensure that people across this region begin to enjoy the fruits of their land, and that it's not foreigners that are coming to harvest the fruits of the land. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Comrade, for that delivery. Comrades, if you permit me, I would like to bring to the podium, physically for us here, our comrade sister. She's an historian. She's an international historian. We feel so honored to have her in our midst, this afternoon. I've introduced her earlier on, our sister Janet, but we would like her to come to the podium and address us, on this question, and also on the whatever Pan-African global question or issues that she feels strongly about. Come over to you, please. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Hi. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Here and there. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm sorry. I'll project. So thank you so much for the recognition and for the invitation to be here today physically in this space. My name is Jeanette Charles Marquez, and I am from Los Angeles, California. I live in Puerto Rico, which is also colonized by the United States. And I have been in Nigeria for the last 3 months, and was in Trinidad and Tobago as well previously. And my roots are from Haiti. So my father is Haitian, and the history of the Haitian Revolution and Marronage and the anti-colonial and Pan-Africanist struggles that took place in Haiti and in so many parts of the Caribbean guide a lot of my work as a historian and also as a member of the Chiapas Support Committee, which is an organization and where I met Comrade Inem as well, who's on this call, who spoke earlier. It's an organization that was founded in 1995, a year after the Zapatista uprising in 1994 against NAFTA in southern Mexico. and it's an organization that's guided by indigenous and African principles of self-determination, autonomy, and liberation. And I won't pretend to know much about all the things that are happening in the Sahel. I actually learned a lot from today's call and the updates, and also in my conversations with INEM and learning from the Thomas Sankara Center. And what I will say is that in the time that I've been here in Nigeria and the time that I've spent recently in Trinidad, which are two very important places in the history of Pan-Africanism and global African struggle, is I've been very inspired by the work that folks are doing today, that are on the shoulders of people like Claudia Jones and Kwame Ture and CLR James and Fumilayo Ransom Kuti. I spent a lot of time in Ogun State, which is a hotbed of revolutionary history, of women's struggle and organization. And so I'm just truly very inspired by what I've learned here in my time during being in Nigeria. And as a historian, my work looks at the relationship between what's happening in Latin America and the Caribbean and what's happening in Africa, especially Western Africa. Thinking about contemporary Venezuela is a lot of my work, and thinking about the Afro-Venezuelan history, culture, the Bolivarian process under Hugo Chavez. I lived in Venezuela for 7 years and had the privilege and the honor to attend many events, rallies, and also study at the Bolivarian University, which was a university founded by Hugo Chavez after the 2004 coup, and precisely to create a new generation of scholars committed to grassroots work, committed to multipolarity and strategic development, committed to nationalization of resources, to popular education. And so, just wanted to say that I'm truly very inspired by the words that I've heard today, the organizations and the representatives here, who I've met briefly, but I'm excited to learn more from. And I'm truly interested in hearing more about from the comrades on the call and the comrades here about how folks view what's happened historically at a revolutionary scale here on the continent in relationship to what's happened in Latin America and the Caribbean, whether that be in relation to Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, other countries that are also trying to create liberated zones in the Americas, especially right now. And another facet of my work is also really interested in how our peoples, both here on the continent and in the diaspora, practice our spiritual and indigenous traditions in relationship to revolutionary struggle. And I see here that there's literature and also images of the Yoruba tradition, and that's also something that I know in many places across the continent there are other traditions and other practices that are very dear to people's revolutionary struggles. And so that's all I have to say, but if folks want to comment on that as well or have a conversation about that, I'd be really excited to partake. So thank you so much.
Before going,
Yes.
because we had you speaking about your experience in Venezuela,
Yes.
and we understand also that the Venezuelan, the Bolivarian revolution is an important revolution for the global South,
Yes.
for the third world, basically. Drawing inspiration from what is happening in the AES, region, and do you think there is any lesson that we can learn from, particularly with what is happening with the resistance that the imperialist forces have been putting up against the government of Maduro? The same discussion we had around propaganda, international propaganda. We are aware of the fact that Western nations have been doing the same against the government of Maduro in Venezuela. Do you think there's any lesson that we can learn from, and also anything at all that can help in understanding, bettering our understanding of how the imperialist forces works?
Yeah. I would say to start that the lessons are mutual, right? So what is happening in the AES right now and everything that the comrades on the call have described are lessons for those of us on the other side of the Atlantic as our revolutionary struggles, whether it's Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Bolivia, the resistance struggles, right, in Mexico, Puerto Rico, all over. They're, we can learn from each other. So I want to preface with that. I think one of the most important things that really transformed Venezuelan society through the Bolivarian Revolution was the nationalization of oil, which was not the first time Venezuela had nationalized its oil, but it was the first time that Venezuela nationalized its oil under Chavez with the vision of redistribution to the people. And so in many ways, what happened through the Bolivarian process was a form of reparations for the people, where a country similar to Nigeria that is a mega producer of oil, people actually got to see the dividends economically of that and monetarily, like in their bank accounts, in their lived conditions, in the resources they had to build schools, libraries, hospitals, cultural projects, sports camps, everything. Whatever people wanted, there has been resources for that in Venezuela because of the nationalization of oil. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, one of the most strategic tactics that the empire uses is strangling the economy. And so manipulating global oil prices, smashing Venezuela with economic sanctions, the the ridiculous amount of theft of gold reserves that has taken place, in Europe with Venezuelan gold. So much of that has been detrimental to the Venezuelan process, right, and to people's lived conditions. Nevertheless, one of the things that I think is truly really important is the relationship people to people. So, I know that the Thomas Sankara Center just went to Venezuela and participated in an international delegation and anti-fascist convening. I know that people they've also been to Cuba, and those direct people to people ties, I think, are what really gonna help our nations in this next era to continue moving forward. Because as someone who lives within the U.S. and within empire, we are witnessing not the beginning of, but the acceleration of its fall. And with that comes tremendous opportunity for our peoples around the world and in the global south to create new relationships, renewed relationships, because our people have already been in contact and have already built ties. And so I think that Venezuela has been at the forefront of that and trying to bring as many people across many different countries, hundreds of nations, together throughout its historical legacy, not just now in the light of this rise of fascism in the 21st century, but also since its beginning. And I again had the privilege of witnessing and attending so many of those gatherings in the 2010s and even recently. And so I think those sorts of opportunities and those sorts of gatherings are going to be really important in this next phase, whether they be virtual or in person. The importance of hearing from each other to challenge this propaganda and challenge the media lies, and really hear from folks. Like to Inam's point, there's no one in Burkina Faso that's talking about any ethnic cleansing, but that's something that the Western media wants to propagate. And similarly, I forget, I think it was Marco Rubio was on the news recently saying that the reason they're targeting Caribbean countries that receive Cuban doctors is because Cuban doctors aren't paid well enough and they're being exploited. Wow. When we know that Cuban doctors and Cuba, its foreign policy has been one rooted in solidarity and mutual aid, and one of those being doctors. And in the Caribbean, they've benefited so much from not only the Cuban medical system, but also Venezuelan oil through Petrocaribe, right, and other sorts of exchanges. And so I think for us, it's really about highlighting the truth and the stories that really are happening on the ground, and and really preparing our people for how to become more self-sufficient and how to be able to exchange, which is why also places like Nicaragua have been under attack for so long, because Nicaragua actually produces 90% or more of what it consumes nationally. They do not depend on imports. They can feed their people. And so that's a threat to empire, in the same way that Cuban doctors are a threat to empire, in the same way that Venezuela has made oil reserves and its economic gain accessible to the country. That's a threat to empire. And so I think what the Sahel is doing is similarly building this front that is a threat to empire, because it implies that now the African continent has a new opportunity to rebuild and to unify. And it's one that, historically we've seen attacked, and that we're seeing attacked now. And so I agree with Sister Comrade Inem when she says it's the task of every African at home and abroad to defend this revolutionary bloc in this liberated zone. And so again, I'm just truly honored, and I believe that, on the other side of the Atlantic, we're learning so much from what's happening in the Sahel right now, and what's happening in places as well in Nigeria, as folks kind of develop this new revolutionary lineage in these times. So, again, so much gratitude for being here.
Thanks so much. Want to thank our sister for that important delivery. Again, she has given us, an interesting understanding of how much our struggle can be understood to be an international struggle. And indeed, the global South struggle, it's a global struggle. It's an international struggle. As far as we understand the fact that capitalism, as understood today, did not emerge without the Atlantic slavery, without the exploitation that went down during the colonial era. So therefore, the African question, the question of the global South is an international question. So we want to thank our comrade for that clarity and for linking, the issues around our liberation. We've had some hands up. Comrades, we're so sorry for not recognizing you earlier. The first hand we had was from Comrade Chinedu. Comrade, are you there? No, I think we've lost him. Comrade Taiwo, we saw your hand earlier on. Are you still with us, Comrade Taiwo? Taiwo, yes, you're there. Comrade? Comrade Matthew. Then let us have Comrade Matthew Shodia.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Comrade Matthew, right? Yes, Comrade Matthew is with us here physically, so come up front, please. Yes. A question?
Yeah, a question.
Okay.
You can just stand there.
Okay, they can.
Okay, so just no. Just sit down.
Hi everyone. So my name is Matthew, and I'm with the AAPRP. So I have two questions that I want to ask. One is to Comrade Inem, and the other is to our comrade with us, Comrade Janet, right?
Yes.
All right. So the first question is I was going to ask Comrade Inem on any updates concerning the Global Fragility Act that talks about building drone bases around countries that border the Sahel areas. For example, there was a report I read from the Black Alliance for Peace that talks about how there are efforts to build drone bases that would actually flank the southern parts of Burkina Faso. So I was going to ask if there are any updates on that, and if like you are seeing any efforts towards like, or if there are any efforts basically towards combating these drone bases that are being planned to be built. So that's the first question. I don't know if you got that right.
go ahead. Just go ahead.
Okay. All right. So all right. So my second question to our comrade here, I was going to ask because you mentioned how you like stayed in Venezuela and how you like been like in the reality of some of the things happening there. I was just going to ask your viewpoints on should I say the annexation of a particular region of Guyana, that's the Essequibo region. So I was going to ask because like there are some like contradictions in that, even like within revolutionary discussions, where some people are like, you shouldn't be doing this, like even though it's a leftist, socialist driven agenda, but then you shouldn't have the ambitions to annex a region of another like
country. So I just wanted to like know your thought on that so as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, Komichinedu, please. And we are so sorry for not calling you earlier, Komichinedu. Komichinedu, please
Yes,
go
no
ahead.
problem, comrade. I understand. Yeah, thank you. Yes, the question I have two questions in particularly, and one of them, is a segue, from I think when even comrade GK Benga Kumlafe was speaking, about democracy, and the way we view it, in Nigeria, in terms of we, always looking up, in terms of concepts, and structuring and understanding things after the West, is that we can see that even within revolutionary, or will I say, leftist, spaces in Nigeria, there's a lot of confusion, about the process that is ongoing in the Sahel, and it's good that I think some organizations, at least within the left, are also represented here. Even today as we are discussing about this, is that we know that yes, the bourgeois imperialist media, spreading a lot of propaganda against, the process that is going on in the Sahel, but within like left-leaning movements, and we have also mentioned, the importance of Niger, strategically, in terms of the revolution, it's because of its closeness to Nigeria and all, and also the fact that also all these countries are also close, even not as close as Niger, but they also, are kind of neighboring countries, with Nigeria. But we have seen condemnations, from left-leaning movements in Nigeria. We have seen condemnations, from, because of the fact, of course, that is a military, just on that basis, that is a military, and because it's a military government that is leading these new processes in this place, they should be condemned outrightly based on the fact that they are military. And this to me is really sad, because I think there's a lot of like we lose a lot of revolutionary potentials from this, and I don't want to mention names or organizations in particular, but I'm sure that most of us knows these things we are speaking to, and my question here, going from this is like, is it high time, within Nigeria, we really call for a debate? Because I feel it's necessary, is very necessary, to kind of understand, even if we say we want to carry out the process of scientific socialist revolution, is that we have to really understand the facts, and what is happening, rather than just taking stances based on some concept of democracy, standing based on military or democracy, and how can we concretely do this, to really call a debate, or, it's just a platform like this, but even on a wider level, to create a kind of understanding, and douse all the confusions, and all the propaganda that I say is has actually seeped even into left-leaning movements, who have bought, this fact that because they are military governments, they are suppressing human rights, and spreading even the propaganda of the bourgeois media, which I feel, because again, just in addition to this question, we saw what happened with the recent End Bad Governance protest in Nigeria just last year, in August, especially in relation to the North. I know most of us are aware, of the issues that came up in relation to Russian flags, charges of treason, but the whole sentiment again, which we're seeing even in the North, is that there was some kind of, and I don't know, I might be wrong on this, but which is still, I still expect us maybe even to speak to this, that there was some kind of solidarity in some sort of sense from like what was happening in Niger, even though maybe in the way they interpreted it as maybe because Russia was kind of giving a lot of support to Niger, so through that symbolism. But there was kind of solidarity, even in protest against so-called democratic government led by Tinubu, and we saw also the suppression of the government, And we can see that even in terms of, the struggle, there's a linkage, there's a direct linkage, there are direct connections, which is why, I think Comrade Inem continuously stressed the point, of even Niger being, of real importance, strategic importance for us to even understand as Nigerians, because there are real strong historical, cultural ties, and we also understand even the general repressive situation in the north, the the deep block, to revolutionary sentiments there. And then we can see these concrete ongoing processes, and I'm saying now, and this is why I'm linking the question to again from beginning, is that how can we, we that say we are struggling within this context of Nigeria, how can we begin? Because, I think it's high time, like, we really, on this issue, we take a stance, will I say, as, I don't know, left-leaning progressive movement, what is the stance on the Niger issue? We can't even have division, I think amongst us as Nigerians, some people taking sides, condemning, without, full knowledge of the facts of what is happening. So how can we get these debates? And let me just round up like this. How can we actually get this debate, this understanding, even among the struggle in Nigeria, so that we can begin to even build concrete ties with what is actually a concrete process, and understanding also even the difficulties, of revolutionary struggle in the northern region of Nigeria. That's the first one. Secondly, I don't know if
Comrade, could you make it in just some seconds? The second one, please. In just some
okay,
seconds,
yes.
please.
Yes, the second one,
Because of time.
I just actually wanted Comrade Inem to maybe just to kind of make a little exposition of, the concrete gains of the federation, that is the AAS, because I think that's what we're even talking about in terms of the AAS state. What have been like the concrete, I know, one of it was even I think that was something that helped defeat, the threat of invasion, but like what have been, kind of the concrete gains of this, confederation, even though I know there has, as you say, there have been moves and calls for a federation, but what have been the concrete gains so far of the AAS as a confederation, in terms of, pushing forward, what I'll call a revolutionary process in the Sahel region. So yeah, those are the two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, my comrade. Right about now, I would like to hear from Comrade Dime. Comrade, you have two questions that have been asked, directed to you. After your response, then we'll come to Comrade Janet. So, Comrade, go ahead, please. Comrade Dime.
Me. Oh, is it? Are you calling me? Sorry.
Huh?
Yes, the question was directed to you.
Yes,
Okay.
yes, please.
Okay. Okay, I heard a few things. So real quick, I'll say, I'm really happy to see my comrade Jeanette. She's a longtime comrade of mine. So it's really nice to see her here. She asked really quickly also about the relationship between the Alliance of Sahel States and Latin America. And so I'll just say quickly that the AES countries all have really good working relationships with Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. And there are joint commissions on a sort of an official level to collaborate with all of those countries, together across various spheres, whether it's agriculture, education, security. They have these joint commissions that are open in terms of state-to-state collaboration. And I think that those three Latin American countries are part of an alliance called ALBA. I think that there's a lot of potential for ALBA and the Alliance of Sahel States to have some sort of official working relationship, because I hear a desire for it on both sides. There's much more I can say, but I'll be brief because there's so many questions. And the other comrade, who is part of the AEPRP, so I'll give a shout out to the AEPRP. I am also in the AEPRP, asked about basically potential, I guess, threats in terms of like physical military bases targeting the AES. So what we know and what's been revealed and basically been stated publicly is the two countries, and this is Ibrahim Traore has been the most vocal about it, but also Abdul Manshani has also spoken a little bit in some of his speeches about this too. The two countries in West Africa that actually are officially, I guess, being warned against or monitored for the actions of their heads of state. You'll be surprised Nigeria is actually not even considered like the #1 threat right now. It's actually Cote d'Ivoire and Benin. So what we know, some of you may have seen, like there was this announcement that Cote d'Ivoire was expelling the French military. If we understand the geopolitics of our region, we understand that Cote d'Ivoire is a staunch French ally, long-term French ally, and Alassane Ouattara, the president of Cote d'Ivoire, just right before he said that he's cutting the military ties with France, he's been visiting Paris multiple times. He even in the past year, even in 2025, there were reports coming out of Cote d'Ivoire, his own publications that he's part of, saying that he was in Paris. He's very close with Emmanuel Macron. So we should not take the fact that there is a change in the sort of physical and visible sort of military relationship in Cote d'Ivoire. We should not take that as some sort of change in his geopolitical alignments. And last year, it was reported in a French outlet called Le Monde that Cote d'Ivoire was speculated to be working with the United States, AFRICOM, to create a new military base in a village called Odiane, which is located in the north of the country, right near the border between Cote d'Ivoire and Mali, and not very far from the border of Cote d'Ivoire and Burkina Faso. So if that is true, then we would see that the United States would be targeting the AES countries through a potential base, speculated to be, under construction in Cote d'Ivoire. Benin is a country that, especially Niger and Burkina Faso, have called out in terms of like the leadership for, I guess, speculations that there's a center directed towards destabilizing the Alliance of Sahel states that's operating out of Benin. Patrice Talon is who's president of Benin, is really regarded as one of the most staunchly anti-AES sort of leaders in the region. Like we know, of course, Tinubu as well, but really, I would say Ouattara, Tinubu, and Talon really right now have probably the most anti-AES reputations. So Ibrahim Traore did say publicly that he believes that foreign intelligence agencies are using a specific state center for destabilization operating out of Benin Republic, not the city of Nigeria, Benin Republic, to destabilize the AES. There was a question about democracy. This is a question that, really I could speak about for an hour, but I know I don't have that much time. I understand this is the democracy question, I think, is one that is, it's a question that has caused a lot of tension and like debate in Nigeria in particular, because Nigeria has, this history of brutal military rule that has led to, violence and suffering. But, we really have to understand that Burkina Faso has, for example, and I use Burkina Faso as a specific example here, but Burkina Faso has its own history in terms of its relationship between civilians and the military, which is just different from Nigeria. Burkina Faso is a country that has known military coups too. In 1966, 1974, 1980, 1982, 1983, 87, 2015 was kind of a failed coup, but it still happened briefly, and then twice in 2022. So this is a country that also understands, what I guess, quote unquote, military rule looks like. But you have to understand it's a different context here. Whereas like in Burkina Faso, military rule has always been reactionary. In Burkina Faso, these sorts of coups have produced both the most reactionary and the most revolutionary leadership that Burkina Faso has ever known. Thomas Sankara is really the shining example of that. So I think we have to look at that at this question of coups and democracy within the context of Burkina Faso specifically, and maybe examine a little bit like that military civil society relationship in that context. And I think also I mean, there was an important comment about how democracy is just weaponized in bizarre ways. You know, I wouldn't argue that Nigeria is a real democracy. It's a bourgeois democracy. But, you know, if we were to do a survey broadly across Nigeria, I don't believe that the masses of Nigerian people, you know, the working people, actually support Bola Tinubu as leader. You know, he's also caused immense economic hardship for Nigerian people. He's not popular, he's not supported, but, you know, we consider it democracy, I suppose, because there is an election. And I think that there's also this focus on the Sahel in terms of like this military thing, which I just find just kind of bizarre in a continent where like Paul Biya has been in power for how long in neighboring Cameroon. And, you know, the African Union has never come out to say, you know, there's a democracy crisis in Cameroon. You know, right now, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger continue to be suspended from the African Union. Their membership is still suspended to this day because, you know, I guess it's against democracy to have a coup. But then, you know, Swaziland can have an absolute monarchy. And, you know, the people in Swaziland are struggling against this absolute monarchy. And that's not a scandal of democracy on the level of these institutions versus, you know, if you go to the streets and interview and ask, you know, regular people, do you think that the AES is democratic? And I've done this. I have a video I can share where I talk to people. You know, I met them for the first time producing the video about whether or not the AES is democratic. They argue that, you know, democracy is not about an election every 4 or 5 years. Democracy is about people being integrated into a process that's favorable to their material conditions and their reality, a power that is by and for the people and that represents them. And so they argue that what's happening in the AES is actually much more democratic than, you know, what's happening in countries like Cote d'Ivoire or Nigeria or Benin or, you know, other countries, certainly Cameroon and many others. I think those are all the questions. So, the gains of the AES Confederation, sorry. It's been not a full year yet since the AES Confederation was formed. So the AES became a confederation in July of last year, of 2024. So, you know, it's still a work in progress. What we're seeing, for example, is that there's a shared military force between the three countries. I think it's really sad that the way African countries have addressed this problem of, you know, terrorism, which again, I argue is imperialist backed forces, you know, it's been every African country for itself. You know, I think it's sad. I think it's sad that Nigeria, for example, had to fight against Boko Haram alone, more or less. You know, then there's been like different sort of, not entirely, I'm not saying like, you know, the ECOWAS had like surface level forms of collaboration, and in the Sahel there was the G5 Sahel, but you know, it's mostly countries that directly face a threat that have fought on their own. So now, you know, in the AES, we're like, no, that doesn't make sense. The way the terrorism works, to be honest, and this is why Nigeria should be involved in this, is because, you know, these groups are crossing borders. When you defeat them in one area, they go over to another. People don't know this. I mean, this is something crazy that I learned. But Boko Haram fought in Mali, in the north of Mali, in 2012 and 2014, when the northern Mali war started. Boko Haram left the Lake Chad region of Nigeria, crossed the border through Niger, and entered into Mali and helped to occupy Timbuktu. So like they are actually crossing these international borders and operating in a like reactionary internationalist way, but the countries aren't doing that themselves up until now. So now there's an AES military force. It's going to go anywhere that there's an attack on the AES. You know, it's Malians, Burkinabe, and Nigerians who are part of this. There's a shared AES foreign policy. We've seen it in action a couple times now. One example is when the Ukrainian officials publicly declared their support for basically a terrorist massacre of Malian armed forces. The AES addressed the United Nations as a bloc, basically saying, you know, this is a statement from the AES body. Another example of that is very recently, all three countries of the Alliance of Sahel States quit there's an international organization called the Francophonie. Nigeria isn't in it, but all of Nigeria's neighbors, except for Niger now, are part of this international organization that is basically like a French, it's like a front. It claims that it's like a cultural and linguistic alliance rooted in French language and like French culture, but it's also deeply geopolitical. At one point it was like all countries in this Francophonie organization that were militarily occupying Haiti through the UN. So they're involved in all sorts of geopolitical things. The AES quit that as a collective. They made that decision as a group. And there's just to wrap up quickly, I know I don't have a lot of time. There's moves in terms of addressing certain things now on the civilian level that are like the level of, I guess, what regular working people are going to see most immediately. So things like, for example, one of the biggest reasons why the AES left ECOWAS, besides the obvious attacks on Niger and the sanctions, was also because there's this deep anger and frustration on the level of people in this region here, saying that ECOWAS never really respected the freedom of movement, people-to-people movement that it claims. And I know this from experience. I've crossed borders in West Africa. I've crossed borders, Ghana to Togo, Burkina to Cote d'Ivoire. It should be 100% free of charge, but they will charge you. If you're crossing these borders, they really target, especially people who are economically struggling more. They actually have to pay more and more, and they get charged constantly by these police officers that are made to pay every time they cross these borders. Sometimes they get stopped a bus will get stopped 5, 6, 7, 10 times, and the people have to pay every single time the bus stops. So the AES is very clear, like, we're not doing that anymore. It has to be real people to people, freedom of movement, absolutely no charges, none of these hidden charges. And there's moves to basically get rid of the telecommunication roaming charges between the countries. And then there was a last thing I was going to say that's escaping me now. Oh yeah, and then they just set up, thank you, they just set up a joint bank for the 3 AES countries. It's a shared bank between the 3 countries with the goal of basically using that to fund and finance infrastructure that will span the 3 the confederation or the future federation. So, it's not like these countries have a ton of resources right now, but they've started to pull their money together in this shared bank so that they can create in the future a railway system that will connect the 3 countries by train. And the big question that we're waiting for them to address is really the question of the currency. So we're really waiting for them, and they've said, we're going to create an independent currency. We're going to get rid of the CFA franc that's tied to France. We'll have an AES currency. We're hoping 2025 is the year, but it's been a promise that we're hearing repeatedly, and everybody's anticipating when the currency will come out. So I'll stop.
Thank you, my sister comrade. I would, your closing, if you could just, your closing, that is the last time I believe that you'll be called on. If you could just, tell us a bit on what you think about Russian solidarity. Just your view. That is in your closing remark. And also, it would be a pleasure if you could share the Hugo Chavez letter. The letter that you mentioned in the it is there in the chat. So comrades that are interested in the letter could check the chat room for that. Comrades, permit me to call on our comrade sister, comrade Janet, to address the question that was posed to her.
So I'll be brief because I know that time is of the essence. Yes. But just before I jump into the Sekibo, I just want to mention 2 things around the question of democracy. As Comrade Ina mentioned, that another kind of hallmark aspect of the Bolivarian process has been its design or practice of participatory democracy. So, Venezuela has had a legacy of elections, right? And people are very experienced in how to vote. There's a high voter literacy and high voter participation in Venezuela. But that is not the only way that people practice democracy in Venezuela. It's one vehicle of democracy. And so things like the commune structure or the community councils, which are, kind of neighborhood groupings where folks actually, they design the infrastructure, they determine and carry out census, they decide what's needed based on women, children, youth, education, health, all of that is managed at a local level. The constitutional reform that started the revolutionary project in 1999, where folks got to rewrite the Constitution and have themselves reflected in that, whether it was indigenous rights or health, the series of laws that happened, the People's Revolutionary Laws, essentially, laws against laws that outlaw racism and discrimination, laws that outlaw violence against women, that include all types of violence, including domestic violence to violence in hospitals that are carried out against women who are giving birth. Like, there's all kinds of ways in which people have codified essentially their history and their desire and their needs and wants as a people in the community. And so I just wanted to mention that. And also just incredible rates of publications. I know this is a growing library as well. And so just the ways in which literacy has been, similar to the Cuban Revolution, literacy was very early in the Bolivarian process and supported by the Cuban literacy model. The degree of revolutionary literature that's come out of Venezuela in the last 25 years has been extraordinary. So the Essequibo piece, I'm actually going to quote an article from Venezuela Analysis. So I'm also, I was a former editor and writer at Venezuela Analysis. I'm a board member currently. And so one of the things I encourage folks, especially around Comrade Matthew's question, is to follow our work on that piece, because it is something, the Essequibo region and the historical dispute has definitely been something that, even when Chavez was alive, was something that he regularly talked about reclaiming. And in many ways, it's not a dispute between Venezuela and Guyana. It's in many ways a challenge to imperialism, because one of the biggest oil companies, ExxonMobil, has vested interests in the Essequibo region because of the degree of oil that they found that has not been quote unquote exploited. And similar to kind of the Berlin conference that happened, and that where Europe broke up Africa according to their own interests, the Essequibo region was divided and broken up based on the United Kingdom's interest. And so obviously Guyana is an English-speaking country. It's part of the Caribbean and CARICOM. And in many ways, this conflict has, or this issue has kind of created these conflicts in the Caribbean regarding Venezuela. And so I didn't mention this earlier, but when I was in Trinidad, the U.S. Southern Command actually signed a new agreement with Trinidad around military use of the island, or being able to use the island as like a military launching pad, base. And they actually cited Venezuela as if there is anything that escalates in Venezuela, we need to come to Trinidad and use Trinidad and its space to operate. And so what's happening in Guyana, I definitely feel like it's something that folks should follow, because it can be, or will be, depending on what happens, used to justify military intervention into Venezuela. I would not be surprised. And it's something that I've been watching for the last few years, because there was, I think it was in 2023 or 2024, Venezuela, Maduro carried out a referendum and asked the Venezuelan people a series of questions around the Essequibo region and whether it's something that Venezuela should pursue in terms of annexation. So I'm just going to read. This is an article that we published. It's authored by Andreina Chavez from April 10th, 2024. There is a more recent article from 2025, but I wanted to quote, in 2018, the Guyanese government requested that the Hague-based court, so the ICJ, confirm the validity of the border drawn by the 1899 Paris Tribunal. So Guyana is asking the ICJ to honor a European agreement that granted Essequibo territory to the United Kingdom, the country's former colonial power. Venezuela, however, defends the 1966 Geneva Agreement, which called for a negotiated solution between the two countries following Guyana's independence the same year. So Venezuela is actually trying to, while it does want to annex, and if you look at the revolutionary maps of Venezuela, it does include the Essequibo. It's trying to have these deliberations directly with Guyana, but of course, ExxonMobil and the UK don't want that, and so they're trying to find any way that they can to deter that. And so, and I also just wanted to quote that in 2015, ExxonMobil found massive offshore oil deposits in the undelimited Essequibo waters. So there's there's the land piece that is under Guyana, but then there's the water piece that is still under dispute. And has since developed major oil drilling projects in the area, which, according to Caracas, Venezuelan government, also goes against the 1966 accord. Exxon and its partners are currently pumping about 645,000 barrels per day and aim to reach more than 1.2 million BPD by the end of 2027. So it's a great question, and I encourage you to follow kind of what we've been covering, because it is going to be something that I can see, especially under the Trump administration, utilizing this conflict or this historical dispute, and escalating it into a conflict that justifies military intervention.
Mm.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Comrade, for that explicit intervention. We are closing now, comrades. But before we do so, comrades, let me say that we've had an interesting session with our comrades. Comrade Taiwo, we haven't recognized you. Oh, wow. So sorry. Please, can you unmute? Comrade Taiwo, let us hear you, please. All right. Oh, so sorry. Yeah. Comrade Taiwo, go ahead, please.
Yeah, can you hear me clearly?
Very well, we can.
Okay, so my question is, I think I started diving into this, how neocolonialism is affecting Nigeria. So how economically and how would an average Nigerian be able to rise above all of these games that the politicians are playing with us and carry along other people? Because I'm building a community where I'm encouraging people to be able to, do things on their own independently and ignore whatever the government is doing and all of that. So hope all of these will not affect it. I mean, it's
Comrade GK, can you come in for that question, please, sir? Comrade GK. Yeah, he is. How new?
Unfortunately, I didn't hear you very well. As comrade moderator, please can you help
Yes.
me recap that question? I didn't quite.
The comment that asked that how is neocolonialism affecting the progress of Nigeria, for instance?
Oh, okay, that's a seminar question. Well, the crisis of underdevelopment, arrested development, and unnecessary human misery and suffering in Nigeria and most parts of Africa and the developing world.
Comrade GK,
can be
if you could just do
directly.
this, sorry, Comrade GK, if you could just do this in a minute or so,
Yeah.
because of time, we would appreciate
Yeah,
it.
that's what I want to do. That's what I want to do. It's a question that we can talk to for the rest of the day. Yeah. But I think the summary actually is the fact that the crisis of arrested development in Nigeria and most parts of Africa and the global south can be directly attributed to the legacy of slavery and colonialism. Neocolonialism, as we have it now, has meant that our resources continue to get pillaged by foreign interests through all manner of policies and programs that are designed to continue to perpetuate our dependence and exploitation. I was in a program yesterday. It's about water policy, the fact that we don't have potable water in most parts of Nigeria. And so an NGO did a study of Ekiti State and a few other states and came up with a report. I find it amazing that Ekiti State borrowed $600 million from the World Bank to provide water. And after the project has been concluded, there's no water anywhere. Meanwhile, the state people have to repay 600 million. I'll use that to demonstrate how neoliberal capitalist economic model actually perpetuate underdevelopment. A fraction of that money was used by a Jakande government in more populous Lagos State, for instance, to provide trillion cubic meters of water, potable water, within 4 years that he was governor of Lagos State. That shows that model, they will borrow you money to entrench debt peonage and make you dependent on them. The money itself will get stolen, the work will never be done, and people continue to suffer. That's the model we've been part of, particularly in the past 25 years, since 1999. We're having the present so-called civilian democratic government. It's led us to nowhere. It's crumbled all our social sector, the educational sector, the health sector, the water and sanitation sector, which are critical to human development, have all been destroyed, despite trillions of naira being spent ostensibly to reactivate these sectors. This is what capitalism has, especially the dependent type, fostered by neocolonialism. That is what it has meant for us. So the alternative actually is to dismantle these models that have obviously not worked in any way. As a matter of fact, our underdevelopment started to get deepened from 1986, when we first embraced neoliberal capitalist economic policies with structural adjustment program. And since then, we've had the systematic dismantling of all trajectories of development. It's unfortunate that 40 years down the line that we started on this journey, with feasibly nothing to recommend it. Some people still continue to insist that this is the only model we have to follow. And I think as thinking humans, we need to begin to get critical. We need to do an appraisal. We need to do a scorecard of a system that has obviously failed, to ask the critical questions and to pose the need for alternatives. And that's where this whole debate about AES is of fundamental importance to me. Because like Cabra said, at the end of the day, we are not talking of some fancy and ideas in anybody said. We are talking about the need to transform the material conditions of how people live their lives. And if that was of concern, then we should be interested in, are the soldiers in the AES doing some things right? What are they doing right? And should that be a base of support? And these are the critical questions. It's sad, like Chinedu said earlier, that even in left circles in Nigeria, people are people dismiss the AES because they say it's military, these are military juntas and so on and so forth. Completely oblivious of the social content of this movement. That this is not just about soldiers in government. This is about massive movement of people who see an opening, to pursue an alternative development trajectory. And they are not joking with it. So you have massive support for this, military government, not because we love people like soldiers, but precisely because they are doing some things right. Again, Chinedu asked, what are some of the concrete things they have done? It's instructive that even in the few years they have been in power, they have done some key projects, apart from the symbolic gestures of moving towards common currency, breaking down the useless borders to ensure free movement of people and goods, to boost interregional trade. We have asked very conscious attempts to renegotiate the exploitation of natural resources in these countries. In some cases, in Burkina Faso and Mali, gold mining sites have been nationalized, and the people of these countries are now getting the full benefits of their resources. They have liberated money to actually embark on massive infrastructural development. And we have seen some visible results. Food production has improved 50% in Burkina Faso. And in Niger, despite all the problems, in less than 2 years, we're having a situation where Nigeria started importing food again from Niger, So for me, these are dramatically important developments that we should pay closer attention to, so that we don't lose sight of an historic opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Comrade GK. Right about now, we want to encourage our comrades from different organizations that are here with us to extend their solidarity greetings. We have Comrade Enrico in our midst. We have Comrade Jide in our midst. We don't know. Comrade Enrico, can we get a solidarity message from you, please? Where's Comrade? Comrade Lekon.
Comrade Lekon.
Okay, he's on the call. Maybe when he's done.
Comrade Lady is the secretary.
Please, Comrade, let us get
Sorry,
a
you have to do
solidarity.
it according to.
No, but Comrade can also address us. He can also address us. And Comrade Secretary can also address us.
And your face. See, should I take the face?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah. Greetings, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here, and I've been somewhat disconnected for a bit, but at the same time, it's always good to come to setups like this because it helps refresh you. And even when you may feel like you're somewhat discouraged, but when you come into a setup like this, like I said before, it just makes you feel like, okay, yes, you can still continue to do what you've always wanted to do. So I want to say a very big thank you to the organizers of this program, PACOR, the MAE, and I think there's one more, but I can't remember. Okay, just two, yeah. So for putting this together, and yeah, big respect to members of the MOP, the Lagos State Coordinator, Comrade Lekon, the Lagos State Secretary, Comrade Olaide, and the coordinator for the MAE, Comrade Shongo, and the coordinator for PACOR 2, Comrade Fagua. I just want to say that it makes a lot of sense to do this, and for a lot of persons who maybe be looking for more education on the progress of the AES and how it maybe affects or helps reinvigorate the spirit of revolution amongst us as Africans who maybe want to see a lot more improvement with regards to our Pan-African agenda. This is something that would go a long way in helping us towards that realization. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Dominica, do you have anything to address? Come in.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank the organizers of MA, Comrade Shongo, Comrade YSG,
APRP, you have to say something.
and Comrade Bayo, for this, putting together this kind of program where we have revolutionary education about, awareness about what's going on in, not just locally, but continentally and also internationally, learning, being more aware of things like this, keeps us going and keeps us educated about the things that we need to, keep doing, and the hope that lies ahead of us, So I really want to appreciate, the MAE and PACOR, for putting this together. I've, always learn a lot personally, from this kind of gatherings, to, it never stops, until the victory is won. So thank you all so much for, giving us this opportunity to also be a part of, what MA is doing, what MOP is also doing is very connected to this, politically as well. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Comrade Matthew.
Comrades would like to also receive solidarity greeting from our comrade from the APRP, the All African People's Revolutionary Party.
Okay. Greetings to everyone. I am Matthew. I'm with the APRP, and I would like to extend my appreciation to everybody that has taken their time to engage in political education. And I'm grateful that we have Africans that are working towards the goal of Pan-Africanism, which is a united and liberated socialist Africa. And I also want to like extend my appreciation to other organizations that are here, the MAE, PACOR, the Movement of the People. Like, thank you very much, and thank you to our comrade Janet. Thank you very much, everyone.
Comrades, let me, on behalf of the Pan-African, the Pan-African Consciousness Renaissance PACO, extend solidarity greetings to you all, and also to tender an apology on behalf of one of our comrades who should have, in fact, led one of the, led the discussion really in the person of Comrade. He is one of the lead-off speakers that we had invited. He had sent a message not quite long that he had troubles in making it down to the venue. That is the station where we have physically here. So, comrades, we from the Pan-African Consciousness Renaissance, we are convinced that there's always a necessity for us to have the African discussion, the discussion around the problems that confront us today. And the importance of these discussions is not just for discussion's sake. As comrades would agree with me, these are discussions that needed to be had in order for us to be able to, articulate the best practical solutions that would get out of our neo-colonial problems, our neo-colonial challenges. As a revolutionary Pan-Africanist movement, comrades were convinced that there is absolutely no other alternative for the African continent other than a socialist alternative. We are convinced in this because since the collapse of the Soviet Union, since the 1990s, the prevailing economic systems, the prevailing political systems that that have governed our realities across the continent are point towards neoliberalism. Politically, economically, our understanding of the solutions to our problems have emanated from the West. And it is apparent, comrades, that over how many decades now, nothing profitable has come out from this illusion. Nothing. Instead of something pragmatic or workable, what we have had is the continuous increment in the number of poor people across the African continent. It's the increment in the level of ignorance. Comrades, least we forget that Oxfam recently reported that the least continent that invests in education is the African continent. The least continent that invests in education. That is to say that across the African government, across the African continent, we have elements that are not interested in the future of this society. They are not interested in the futuristic transformation of the African continent. Because how would you have a continent that is not prioritizing, or how would you have a society that is not prioritizing, the educational sector? You cannot have transformation. In fact, there's no future for any society without the educational sector. But this is the neo-colonial, character, nature and character of the African ruling class, the African elites that we have across board. And which is why, for us, there's beauty in what is happening, in the Sahel, region. There's beauty, there's a necessity for us to have this alternative. So comrades, as a revolutionary, Pan-Africanist revolutionary movement, we are so, glad that you found time to join us, online, and also our comrades that are with us here physically. We are rounding up now. We would, before doing so, we would give our comrade lead of speakers. Of course, I've given the apology on behalf of Comrade Eyi. Is one of the, supposed to be one of our lead of speakers. So in closing, we'll give our two comrades, the lead of speakers to, just wrap up their thoughts on this issue, on this question. Comrades, for us as a revolutionary movement, we are interested in how we can use this kind of event to build that necessary Pan-African solidarity. And that is why we are glad to have our comrades from different organizations here. We would think that leaving this meeting will be forced to really build that practical engagement and solidarity amongst ourselves. Before the comrades will come in, I would like to invite okay, let us have our comrades leaders speakers thereafter. On final thought from GK, final thought, comrade Ime, on the subject matter for today. Who will go first?
Okay. I will make it very brief. My final thoughts will be that I first of all to appreciate the MA and PACO for the program, and to say that this shouldn't be a one-off. We should actually see how we enlarge the program. I think we should be very deliberate and intentional in getting across to cultural workers, especially those in the media. We have a lot of problems with our media's over reliance on Western media outlets. We just have regurgitation of CNN, BBC, VOA and whatnot. So, in fact, for me, I've stopped listening to most of our local media outlets because you can just as well listen to BBC and that's it. That's not good enough. I think we need to be intentional in actually involving our cultural workers in this part of discourse so that they can get to be more critical about what they are dishing out there. They are important because they help to shape popular consciousness. And even people who claim to be left, who claim to have better access to information, tend to be befuddled about how to approach these issues because conceptually they have been made to believe that certain parameters are absolutely unacceptable. So I think my closing remark would be to say, yeah, we should continue with this kind of discourse, but we should not just make it a dialogue among ourselves. We should not continue to preach to the converted. We should make very, very conscious attempt to reach out to very critical sectors that can help us to also affect popular consciousness about these very critical issues on more massive scales. Thank you very much.
Comedy man.
Okay, so I want to thank once again, all of the organizations that were involved in this and who attended. So MAE, Parkour, MOP, the APRP, and Chiapa Support Committee, which is the organization that Jeanette represented. I think the most important thing to say in conclusion is that our only solution as Africans is to really Pan-Africanize. We have to Pan-Africanize our way of thinking and our frameworks, and we have to Pan-Africanize also our organizations and the way that we're operating and the way that we're struggling. I think we need more than solidarity between Nigeria and the AES. We need more than solidarity, because solidarity is really something that you extend to another people who maybe struggling somewhere, versus we're actually the same people. AES, Nigeria, it's the same, we're the same people. And so I think we really have to recognize it is one struggle. And African revolutions have really struggled to sustain themselves over the years. And it's largely because of this question of Pan-Africanism versus our disunity. It's so important. And I think the organizations that are represented here understand this, that we understand that we're fighting for the total liberation and unification of Africa under scientific socialism. And also that until Africa is free, no African anywhere can ever be free or respected. When we talk about the AES, the core of the AES, the reason why the AES exists right now began first with relationships between the people of the Sahel and the region. The fact that people in Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and also other countries in the region, particularly the French-speaking countries, they've become hyper aware of one another. If you were in Burkina Faso, even before Ibrahim Traoré, we reached a point where, regular people on the streets were following very closely what was happening in Mali. Mali was the first country to have this revolutionary transformation, but people in Burkina Faso were super aware of it. And for many, many years, people across the French-speaking region of West Africa have noticed that the struggles are the same. So, if you go to Togo, if you go to Benin, they're actually following the AES very closely. They're realizing, like, okay, France has been exploiting all of us. There was this kind of collectivization and unification of people's sort of the scope of people's struggle. You know, it was Malians, Burkinabe, Nigerians who said, hey, we're all being exploited by France. And they realized this. And, you know, they engaged with each other on an organizational level. They were consuming the same media outlets and the same media reports across the region. They were following very, very closely the developments of all of these countries. I think, you know, sometimes when we talk about the potential for revolution in Nigeria, we have the tendency to talk about it in a vacuum. Like this is something that's just going to happen when Nigeria recognizes its own internal contradictions. And yes, that's a part of it. That's a part of it. But I really think Nigeria has to understand that, you know, any revolution that comes is going to be part of a broader Pan-African struggle, and it has to be something that is connected to its neighbors. So I think, you know, we really have to see the AES as a window of opportunity for the struggle in Nigeria, especially the fact that Niger is right there on the border. There is a language barrier, I understand that, but there's also many shared languages. And I think we have to figure out how we can use that to our advantage. The fact that, you know, maybe there's an English-French divide, but there's plenty of people who are speaking the same language in the south of Niger and the north of Nigeria. So how can we use that as a sort of tool to begin to really, you know, spread positive propaganda, revolutionary propaganda, understanding that, you know, everything is propaganda in one way or another. We just want to have the correct message, right? Everything has its bias. How can we get the revolutionary message out there? We have to use these things to our advantage. We need to have strong people-to-people relationships. We need to follow closely what's happening, you know, across the region and honestly across the continent, even outside of the AES. I think that Nigeria's potential for revolution would be strengthened the more Nigeria were the more Nigerian I guess people organized in Nigeria, and then even just regular Nigerian working class people begin to forge connections with some of their neighbors. Maybe Nigeria struggles because it is surrounded by French-speaking countries, but you know, we need to have an understanding, maybe if you're in Nigeria, of the form of exploitation that's happening in Ghana and happening in Sierra Leone, happening in Liberia, happening in the Gambia, because it was that kind of connection first that allowed people's consciousness to reach such a mass level to make something like the AES possible. So I just conclude by saying we just have to Pan-Africanize. We have to really connect. We have to really understand that, you know, it's one African struggle, and the revolution, even if it happens, if the revolution comes to Nigeria, like or not just comes from the sky, but obviously if we build the revolution in Nigeria, it will be impossible to sustain if Nigeria is surrounded by, you know, reactionary countries. So really we need to have this scope. It's more than solidarity. So I think we really, I guess that's my parting message, you know, connect with Niger, connect with the AES, and then also figure out what's happening. You know, maybe there can be some sort of English-speaking network across West Africa, the way there's a really, really strong one in the French-speaking countries right now.
Thank you very much, Comrade. You forgot the question on Russia.
Yes.
Although it's direct.
Okay, the Russia question. You know, Pan-Africanism is going to be the ultimate solution to our problems. Of course, that's how this is how I feel. And you know, what was I gonna say? We have to be able to be in a position where we can build that. When we liberate the African continent, it will be a death blow to imperialism everywhere. But we can't get to that point if we're living in a unipolar world that has been dominated by the West for so long. And so I don't agree with people who believe that Russia and the West are the same. You know, they didn't develop the same way historically. The West has really developed through the exploitation of Africa and other regions that they've colonized, including Latin America and Asia, versus Russia just has a different course of development historically. So I think we need to be relying on any sort of partnerships that we can have that's going to allow us to basically like flee from the crushing thumb of neo-colonial rule. And Russia right now is allowing that. It's created a window, you know. Again, we still have to unify Africa. Like that's going to be the only ultimate long-term solution. But if we can rely on other countries that are resisting unipolar, you know, NATO exploitation and domination around the world, then we should do that absolutely. And so it's positive. It's positive, you know. I'd also just say, you know, just another thing, you know, people will say like, Russia is a colonizer, but we have to understand what colonialism is and what neocolonialism is. In one of his books called, I always confuse it with the Fanon title. It's the Kwame Nkrumah one, towards colonial independence, something like that, because I confuse it with the Fanon one. It's towards the African Revolution.
Towards the African Revolution.
Is that the one? Thank you. There's like a Fanon book and a Kwame Nkrumah book that have a similar title, but I'm talking about the Nkrumah one anyways. He quotes a French colonizer named Jules Ferry, who was very, very explicit in defining colonialism. He was an advocate for it. He's somebody who called for, the extension of colonial rule. And he said, we need the colonies for 3 reasons. He said, we need the colonies for, the acquisition of raw materials, for markets for our goods, and also for fields for investment. That's how we defined colonial rule. And this was, during the early 20th century. We're living under a neo-colonial era, and it's the same exact economic order. That's the basis of, unfortunately, pretty much all African economies, more or less. Russia, so the big sort of fight on the part of the colonizers and the neo-colonizers has been to block a lot of African countries from developing any sort of pathway towards industrialization, so that they can continue to be these sort of zones used for the plunder of their resources and for the export of European or US finished products. The whole, if you look at the 20th century, a lot of the assassinations that happened, the coups, these were leaders that were, doing a little bit too much to industrialize and develop their economies. We see something very different with Russia. Russia that's willing to say, we'll help you develop nuclear power, or we'll help you to, build these factories and these refineries. That's really contrary to the end goal of neo-colonialism or colonialism, which is about dependency. So Russia is allowing some pathway towards future long-term independence. Of course, they have their interests. That's normal. That's how geopolitics work. But we should work with any country that's willing to respect our sovereignty, and these technology transfers are going to lead us to be even more independent in the long term. So I'll stop there.
Thank you very much, comrade sister. Let us use this opportunity to invite comrades that are online with us. Comrades, we have different organizations, for comrades that are interested. You could always private chat the admin of MAE, if you're interested in knowing more about any movement that you've heard of this afternoon, PACO, MAE, APRP, these are comrades. And in fact, because, Kwame Ture had said it all, we must organize. We are not mobilizers, we are organizers. And so what this moment, affords us with is the opportunity to, to connect with like-minded comrades. So let us make a very good use of this opportunity, comrades. We thank our comrades, lead of speakers, for honoring our invitation, for the works at which they've been doing also before now. Comrade GK, well respected comrade, has been organizing informal workers across Nigeria. More often than not, the capitalist system do think that informal workers are elements. They are persons that they should not. They are forces that should not be reckoned with. When in actual fact, informal workers, are the sole determinant of the direction of what economy will take. At the lower strata. So we want to thank comrade for the activities he has been putting up in Nigeria and beyond, and also to thank our comrade sister, comedian. She has been vocal. You go online, you see her, well articulated. She has been, telling us, based on the fact that she's on ground, she has been exposing to us, Pan-African narrative and perspectives on what is happening in the Sahel state. Comrade sister, we thank you. We say more power to you, more knowledge to you. To all our comrades that have joined and comrades that have made these great interventions thus far, we say thank you to you. I'm not going to, in fact, I've been taking over the responsibility of of our comrade comrade Songo. He's going to deliver the vote of thanks. I was only doing beyond my limit. So let me invite now comrade Songo is going to deliver the vote of thanks. Thank you, comrades, for joining us.
We all giving thanks, but I just wanted to make a few closing remarks. And thanks so very much for the enlightening talk. I want to refer to what Comrade Nem said, about building connections. I think it was a key objective, of this program. First of all, we want to, educate the Nigerian people in Nigeria, especially people who are active politically, about how important what is going on in the Sahel is. And we want to move towards building those connections. They are very, very important. Goes back to the question that Taiwo asked about neocolonialism. It is at the root of everything that's happening. The fact that the fight against neocolonialism is proceeding in these countries. But we, on the other hand, are regressing even more into it. I give the sense of Bola Tinubu going to France to establish, I don't know what they call it now, the new France Afrique, to invite France to come and do mining in Nigeria. Now, France has been kicked out of these countries, and Nigeria is inviting them to come to Nigeria to expand their mining operations. And the essence of this is in neocolonialism, as Inem has also put those three very important points about what neocolonialism is. Africa is only for resources, to give our resources, and not for self-sufficiency, industrialization, and so on. And so what Tinubu is doing is putting us, further entrenching us under the model of resource extraction and deindustrialization. He's also attacked education in Nigeria, so less people are able to be educated, and then we look at the Congo. I also thank Comrade Taiwo for sharing a video about the Congo, because the Congo is very, very relevant, of course, as we know how rich the Congo is in resources. We know what's going on. We know the rebels, for those who might not be aware about the role of the M23, Rwanda, under neocolonialism, and why the Congo is always at war. And now the Congolese president has written to Trump to invite him to come and take over resources in the Congo, so he could help the security of the Congo. He is inviting the Americans, the same people who are responsible for insecurity in the Congo, to give them the resources they are after in order to come and secure the Congo. Now, as we know, under colonialism, the imperialists only build infrastructure to carry out resources from the countries they exploit. Now, in the Congo, there's the Lobito corridor and a railway that's been built by the same United States, and it's all part of securing that issue that we have the M23 and all that instability. So I think a lot of African rulers have, quite frankly, gone very mad, because I saw that, I re-saw that news yesterday, and it got me very sad. But brings me to another point. I want to encourage people. Yes, of course, you've heard about the MEE, PACO. I think this job of educating and connecting is very important. As you have said, we have just developed this library, and we have resources as well that are very important for understanding what is going on. If you look at the historical things, if you look at, what was going on, for example, in the initial struggle against imperialism, when we go back to Patrice Lumumba, the struggle of Kwame Nkrumah and so on. And and then also you find out the roles of the Soviet Union. You can go back into history to look at that. You can find out what was going on in Korea. Anyway, it's very important to have this kind of in-depth understanding of imperialism, and our library offers that. I would like people who attend to help us to publicize this library. Also, if you have people who can donate, we need funds. Of course, your support will be very, very great, well received. I should also mention that, we have personally been inspired by the Thomas Sankara Library in Burkina Faso that Inem leads as well, and of course, uh, such act, such initiatives have to be supported by all Pan Africanists. So the last point I want to make, I put in the chat earlier. MAE is a member of the Coalition for the Elimination of Imperialism in Africa. That coalition was formed around the time in which the Nigerians were going to lead an attack on Niger, after the takeover in Niger and the actions to kick out the French. And, and we see that it becomes necessary to educate, to inform, and to defend, the struggle against imperialism in those zones, and so the Coalition for Imperialism in Africa has a lot of good material that is released. Very recently, we wrote something about the agricultural initiatives in those countries, how that is tied to the issue of self-sufficiency and industrialization, very, very positive developments in agriculture. There are other so many developments on a regular basis that you will not see, as has been said earlier, by the media. So I would like to commend the CIA, Abbas Imperialism, on Instagram, and you can go to the Substack. Lots of useful materials, on what is going on, as well as other aspects of imperialism in Africa. Like there's been some information about the Lobito corridor in the Congo. So that's it for me. I would like to thank everyone so much for coming. We are going to be sharing this, of course, on our social media. We know that we are going to reach a lot of people. That's why we've done this. We need to reach people. We need to get people to be more aware, especially from those of us in Nigeria, because we are Nigerian based. We have to ensure that Nigerians understand very much their duty in these times and what we can do to build the connections, particularly with our immediate neighbor Niger. So do join the MAE, join PACOR, and support all our activities. Thank you very much. So.
Greetings, comrades. For the new participants, I would like you guys to read more about our website. The link is being dropped on the group, and you can also see what's it called, our social media handles for first timer like comrade. So I'm sorry to say I want to pronounce your name properly. Comrade Faye Shara and also comrade Olatubosun. For you to read more about our organization, you can click on the website and also our social media angles on Twitter, on Instagram, and also on Facebook. Movement for African Emancipation. You'll find out in everywhere there. Thank you very much for you guys coming around.